What's up, my fellow poker enthusiasts? It's Rene, aka the Wacko here, and together with my co-host Adam Carmichael, we represent to you the Mechanics of Poker podcast. In this podcast, we deconstruct high-stakes poker players, figuring out what it is about them, how they think, what they do that makes them so successful, with an extra focus on the obstacles they faced and the skills they had to develop to surpass them. Over the years, me and Adam have gained a lot of experience in both reaching high-stakes poker ourselves and teaching other players to do the same. We have bundled all this knowledge together in our coaching program, The Mechanics of Poker, which is the most complete poker coaching product on the market. If you want to have a chance to work with me and Adam so you can get unstuck and make more progress in your poker career, go over to mechanicsofpoker.com to apply. But without further ado, let's learn from another high-stakes player's journey in today's episode. Welcome back to another episode here on the Mechanics of Poker podcast. In today's podcast, we will have a chat with Ukrainian high-stakes cash game player Sergii Levchenko, better known as Jayser1337 online. Jayser has worked himself up from 5NL to 5KNL in 4 years and has competed up to 40KNL and rec warring up to 10KNL at the peak of his poker career. Sergii has a passion for learning and teaching and agreed to come on the pod to share the most valuable lessons he has learned along his journey as a professional poker player. As always, I'm joined by the fittest co-host in the poker industry, Mr. Mindset and Performance, Adam Carmichael. Adam, what are you most excited for in today's pod with Sergii?
Well, every guest has a new exciting story that I'm always fascinated about hearing. And with Sergii, from our kind of questionnaire, we found out that he struggled with mindset in particular for a long period, yet he's battled through that and created toolkits to allow himself to flourish and play high stakes poker. So really curious to do a deep dive with him on what he's been able to develop mindset wise in order to thrive at high stakes poker. So should be a fascinating conversation.
But before we start, I would like to give a big shout out to GTO Wizard for sponsoring today's episode.
We are proud to announce a technological breakthrough. Introducing GTO Wizard AI. This powerful technology can solve any custom poker spot in seconds to high accuracy. Unlike pre-solved solutions, this allows you to edit the solving parameters. That means you can modify the ranges, change the stack and pot sizes, customize the betting tree, and automatically simplify and optimize your bet sizes. Brace yourself. The meta is about to change.
So sign up to GTO Wizard using the link below, gtowizard.com/mechanics. Get 10% off. Join the weekly coaching webinars, of which one every month is with me. Looking forward on educating you guys there. But without further ado, let's hop in today's episode with Sergii. All right, there he is, Sergii. Sergii, thanks for coming on the pod.
Thanks for reminding me, guys.
Sergii, it's not a big surprise as it's been a trend with players that we have had on, but I saw that you are a very competitive person. You competed in gaming competitions playing RuneScape. I had to Google that, to be honest, but it seems like an online multiplayer role-playing game, if I understood correctly. And when you play sports like table tennis, badminton, or just rock climbing by yourself, you are competing with how well you've climbed before. So you're very competitive in, I guess, everything you do. That always makes me ask the question, where does this drive to compete in everything you do come from, and how does competing make you feel?
Hey, that's a great question. I think it's always a mix of factors like your genetics, your genes, and the way you were fostered in a childhood, plus the experience that you've had in your childhood. Usually what makes, the most competitive people competitive are some hardships that they had to deal with, I think, in the childhood, and not trauma specifically, but maybe some things that, made them feel the toughness of this life on the early stage.
So for you, what kind of experience stands out?
I wouldn't say that there was anything precisely, traumatic, or maybe it was not the best word to use. But I'd say maybe being raised in a discipline. My father served in military for like 25 years. So he was like not very strict to me, but I always, learned what the discipline is from the early on. And then, growing up in Ukraine, um, spending a lot of time on the street with your friends and sometimes not friends, you get some kind of experience early on.
You get to stand your ground. You're like, okay, it's either I'm at the top or I get run over.
Well, maybe not exactly like that, but yeah, the notion is similar.
I think it's also common that, for example, do you have any siblings? Because, like, let's say, for example, you're the youngest of like four or something. You have like a natural more need to compete because you're always competing with your older brothers. Do you maybe have any siblings that you were competing with?
Actually, not. I don't have any brothers, only cousins, and yeah, so nothing of that sort. I think it was more like of parents telling you, like, "Come on, why aren't you studying better? Look at X, look at Y. You could have done better. Get your stuff together, man. It's
That
time to show some class and stuff."
studying was maybe I think many poker players they've tried some studying, but usually it was not really their path. You then got very hooked into gaming. You even mentioned that you were competing in like clans and stuff like that. Could you tell us a little bit about your, let's say, RuneScape career? You can call
Oh
it that
yeah,
way.
those were the fun times. I hope some people who watch this podcast or listen to it have played it before, because I met a few people recently, actually, even in Portugal, who were of my age and who played this game as well. What was it, 15 years ago, 20 years ago? Time passed on fast. And everyone who played this game has some really, deep nostalgia about it. It's a game where you get your character, you have to train strength, agility, whatever, and then you have other people playing, so you get your friends online. Then you unite into clans, and then you start fighting other clans. You get the sense of community. Yeah, it was great times.
What did like your experience in competing in this game or in various competitions? What did that teach you that possibly gave you an edge when you switched into poker?
I think there are a few components that I view important. One of them is to learn how to lose on the early stage of your life. Like when you're shown your place, when your ego does not get too big, and if you persist, if you try to overcome these hardships, if you try to, like, each time you lose, you get your stuff together and then come back, and yeah, pretty much you get trained, maybe in some artificial way by doing it online, but still you even get some managerial skills, because it was like a clan of 25 people. I was at that time 18 maybe, so it lasted from like 14 years to maybe 18 or 19 years. And at that time, I remember being, having some high rank in a clan. And we had like 25 people from all over the world. We had some guy who was a policeman in Miami who was in his 30s. And, like very, very different types of people, some young gamers from New Zealand, whatever. And then we would just gather on a TeamSpeak or Ventrilo and then go and fight other guys. It was so much fun.
I mean, I guess a very big difference that stands out to me is, yeah, you were working in a clan. You said 25 people. Poker is a bit more individual. Have you always tried to work in a team, even in poker? Maybe also due to your experience in gaming, maybe it was positive or negative. You can elaborate on that, or were you more of like a solo grinder and always did everything yourself?
That's a cool question. Actually, if we rewind back on my poker career, I have always been working with somebody. The only periods when I would work 99% by myself were maybe the last half, maybe the last half of the year of my career. And before that, I would always work with other people. I found a lot of joy and a lot of opportunities to grow when you work with like-minded people, especially those who have slightly different play style than you. You can learn a lot from them. But it's actually not that easy to find a person who is approximately on the same level, who's not like a coach to you and not somebody who plays lower. and then you get this some symbiosis when both of you can learn something from each other. Do you guys think it is something rare? Was it hard for you to find such people?
I mean, the biggest dilemma in poker is that if you find that sweet spot, they're usually the guy sitting across to you at the table, right? I've worked with many players as well throughout my career. Um, I definitely agree with that. It makes it a lot more enjoyable. You get different perspective. It just also helps your growth. We kind of had the rule that, or at least rule. Let's say, for example, I would play against a good buddy of mine that I do a lot of strategy with. If I would be exploiting in on certain areas, that I'm sure gives me an edge over him. And I don't think it's something that necessarily will cost him a lot of money versus the population. So it's just a league that I can exploit, but I don't think a lot of people will exploit him on that. I would keep it to myself, but I think it's just a fundamental leak in his game that's just costing him a lot of money. That's where I would say, hey man, maybe you should change this in your game because I think this is going to cost you a lot of money. It was kind of the rule that I had. I don't know, Adam, do you have maybe some similar experience?
Well, I was playing heads up, so I was never across the tables to my friends. But yeah, I can definitely relate to being around like-minded people. Ideally, you want to have kind of people who you like off the tables as well. I know you can have just study partners for poker specifically, but it does help a lot if you're spending a lot of time with people that you gel well as personalities, you bring other things to the table. It's one of those things like when you find the right people, it's like you said, that synergy just exists where you learn from each other in a really cohesive way. But for people who haven't found those people, it's sometimes hard to give advice on how do you find that kind of right person to help you on your journey. But yeah, it sounds like for you, you found the right people at the right times. So yeah, it sounded like that worked out well for you.
Was this something that you actively did, Sergio? Did you actively reach out to certain people to work with, or they sort of magically arrived on your path?
That's a great question, actually. And maybe, listeners of this podcast could take away some ideas from this because I did not have any intention as I started my blog on the biggest Russian speaking poker forums that had, people from all over the ex Soviet republics, Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Moldova, Kazakhstan, whatever. So quite a big community. And I've started a blog just for myself to be more disciplined, to post some hands. And with the time, there was this effect of people reading it and then like messaging me asking like, hey man, let's, want to discuss some hands together in Skype. And then we would do that. And that way, I think I found many people who've become my friends. Some of them become my mentors, like in a kind of mentors. So I think that, having a blog or maybe a YouTube channel like now is a way to express yourself, to show what you are like. So then if people, like-minded people to call them, I think is the right word, they will just try to connect with you. And it gives you a lot of opportunities to find new friendships and partnerships.
Yeah, I think like in the past it used to be forums, right? I shared this as well. I remember I was on a Dutch forum, less members because Soviet is a little bit bigger than the Netherlands. But I remember at some point I just messaged literally everyone on the forum that was sort of active, like, hey, I've recorded my session. Do you want to go over it together? Stuff like that. I reached out to everyone. And I remember a couple guys applied. Those actually turned out to also later be good poker friends of mine. They all had successful poker careers. I'm not saying that if you responded to my message, it automatically means you have a good, successful poker career. But at least, they were also open for it. They jumped on a call with me and we did that with other players as well. So we kind of formed a little group there. And I think that is super beneficial. In the past, it was forums. Nowadays, I guess you gave a good example. It's just a matter of trying to put yourself out there so people can actually reach you. For example, YouTube, for example, Instagram nowadays, right? Social medias that were not as popular. I think when we both started to get into poker. What first attracted you? So you were playing these you were playing RuneScape. How did you make the transition to poker? When did you get in touch with poker, and what kind of attracted you towards the game?
I think it was on the first year of my university in Kiev. One of my friends just had introduced me to this game, explained me the rules. I tried playing the first game. I was like, "What the hell this game is? I don't get it. You have to bluff. Like what? I don't like it." And then I was just doing my stuff, studying. And then he would message me like, "Hey, we're coming to play this offline poker. You wanna play?" It costed like what $2 to enroll in a free roll, and then you can exchange that. You get cheap for the $2, and then you can get a beer, for example, and then you have to play a field of 50 people maybe, and then the first place gets something like $70. So in between my studies, I've started playing in those games. It took maybe 2 weeks of the offline tournaments to win, to actually get the first place. And I was like a total donk, not understanding anything. But, the competition was the same. So I won plus the variance. We all know the variance. And then I won $70, and that was a lot to me by that time. My in the university, I would get like $70 a month, because I was studying on a. I don't know if you have that in Netherlands. How do you call it? Like when you get
It's
paid?
like a student contribution or something from the government. You mean?
Yeah, like a very small student contribution, but still enough for a student. Anyways, so I won that, and I thought like, all right, so why am I studying? Maybe I should try something else. And then I've started playing offline games, and it was quite easy because you could play a very tight play and on the low stakes. I think the buy-in, if we convert it into dollars, was like $10, NL10 probably $10, and people would just drink, have fun, talk. So you can play a very niche strategy and still end up making money. So that was my transition to poker.
Was that like the first? So was that like the first type of strategy that you learned, and how did you get how did you learn that strategy? Did you read a book? Did you go online? Be like, hey, because in the beginning when you play poker, you might be like, well, this is just luck. You need to get good cards. When was like the first time that you realized, oh wait, there's actually a strategy to this that you started to implement?
So I was discussing the strategy with my friends at that time because we all were playing how to play, this offline nitty bum hunt type of poker. But then at some point, and I've started making quite a good money, maybe like 5x, 6x to my, student salary. And at some point, I've thought like, this is not serious. If I want to make real money, I have to transition online. And that's when I've found about poker strategy, started reading all the articles, and then I've pretty much downloaded and printed everything that I've could. And whenever I would go to university in a bus, I would just get those notes, start reading them, thinking about poker during the lessons in the university. Pretty much like that.
Do you remember any like first big strategical aha moments where you're like, oh, that's how it works? That you're like, like for example, if I talk about my experience, they were like, I remember, I think they called it the freeze play, if I'm not mistaken, where you raise the turn and they would never come over the top. They would just call, and then you could always just check behind the river. So it was like, or on the flop, a kind of same play. You freeze the action, and they would always call, and you could check behind the next street. So it's like cheap showdown. And I started to implement it, and indeed, it sort of worked. I was like, oh wow! So actually, because I do this, you do that, and that has like a strategical consequence, and that kind of got my brain thinking in a whole different direction. Like, wait, my actions have consequences to how you react, and that can either be positive for me or negative for me. Did you have any like similar experience that stands out to you?
I would not call it an aha moment, but it was quite fun. I don't know if you guys have it in English poker world when it's called the Yeti theorem. If somebody three bets, like when you raise on a dry board, and if somebody three bets on a dry board, it basically means that he never has a hand and he's always bluffing, especially if the board is dry, like ace seven deuce, whatever, queen eight five, no flush draws. So yeah, I was like, three bets, so let's shove, and stuff was working at least sometimes.
But when you start to implement that, did it then also send your brain in the direction of like, oh wait, if this is possible, what's like the next? How do you call it? Yeti play?
Yeti theorem. I don't
Yeti
know why the
theorem?
hell it's called like that,
I
but
don't know
yeah, that's
either. I
what I
mean,
still
it's the
remember.
first time I heard about it.
Yeah, would be fun if I mispronounced it, but 99% it was called Yeti theorem. Yeah, another thing I've just recalled. If somebody raises you in a three bet pot on a monotone board, he is almost never bluffing. And it was way back before the strategy of 10% c bets, like when people used to c bet half pot or one third, and then if the caller in position raises, then you like think about it. Okay, if he's bluffing, what is he bluffing with? The only possible hand is like ace X with ace of suit, and especially if you hold that hand, then you pretty much cut off his bluffs. Or if you have some overpair, then you will flip, which would be the best scenario for you, or you are just drawing dead if you have no suit. So that's another thing I remember.
So these were like your first kind of encounters with equity of the bluffing range, and I guess a little bit psychology of, well, people don't fast play dry boards because why would they, right? The board doesn't look scary, so the more scary the board, the more people fast play. It's still true to some degree, you know, if you think about psychology nowadays. But yeah, back then it was definitely enhanced. Did you have any? You mentioned that you noticed that, hey, wait, online I can make more money than offline. People can be a little bit scared when they go from offline to online poker. Did you have any like role models that you could look up to, or people that have shown you the way of like, oh wait, actually in online poker you can make a lot of money, let's do this? Or were you just naturally very confident in yourself?
That's another great question. Thank you for that. Because it was a very important moment that actually led me to transition to online. The blogs on poker strategy of some pretty well-known players like Inner Psycho, Inner Psi, I think, streamer on GG. I remember reading his blog and I was like, wow, he's posting these graphs, he's winning a lot of money. Like, poker should be real because these people must be real. And then some other players, I don't remember their nicknames. I mean, for Haley for sure. Especially asking about the role model. For Haley was always a role model for me. I remember reading his blog during the times when I had the worst times in poker, like not being able to get past an L100, and then like getting this inspiration by seeing somebody who has gone through that already, who has dealt with all the possible hardships, with all those 30 binds downswing in a few day sessions. So it was a huge boost, and one of the reasons why I did, you know, not prevail, but continued to climb up.
So basically, he showed you that it was actually possible, despite encountering certain hardship like downswings. Didn't that maybe, because it can on one side give you inspiration, but let's say you haven't started and you're reading this blog here. Oh my god, this guy's losing a lot of money. It's very hard for him mentally. Like some people would have the response to that, like, hey, I'm out. I'll go get a normal job. But you were, I guess, it triggered something else in you. So where did the because like someone else can do it, but then where does the belief come from that you could do it as well? Does it have something to do with your background in succeeding in gaming, for example?
I wouldn't say that I've like 100% believed in myself. To me, the most important question was, is it even possible to make money playing online poker? And if those people did not have their blogs, I don't even know if I would try playing online, because how would I know that online poker is not like full of cheaters, if it's not dead, if it's not full of bots? Because when you play offline and some people talk, they're like, oh, online poker is 100% of bots. Believe me, I know somebody from there. And yeah, I mean, it was one of the decisive factors of my transition.
So when you decide to go play poker for a living, and you share that with your surroundings, for example, your parents, usually people, they're usually not jumping straight in the boat with you, like, go Sergi, yes, online gambling, why not? Great idea. I think you had a similar experience with your parents, but then I think you mentioned you showed them a graph of 75k hands on 10 and L, and you explained them the concept of variance. Now, I'm sure there's some people listening here that are like, I've been trying to convince my parents that poker is a good idea. How the hell did you convince your parents that poker was a good idea, and how did you explain variance to them that it actually made them click?
So I explained it the exactly same way I've understood what the variance is during the school. When I was like, what, 10 or 12 years old, we had this math lesson about the theory of possibility. And the teacher told us, like, if you toss coin 100 times, you'll get 50 heads and 50 tails, almost 50% with some deviation. And I was like, oh yeah, sure. why would that happen? And then during the break, I would actually toss the coin and I would get something like 47 to 53. And I was like, wow, this stuff actually works. So this is how the life works. And then I've just explained this idea to my parents. And then I said, okay, imagine that instead of a coin, you toss like a triangle that has 3 sides, or something more complex that has like 6 sides. And the possibility it works the same way. There is a chance of getting each side every time. So this is how poker works. You play in this game when you don't see the cards of your opponent, and you make these assumptions, and then you just toss the coins that have 6 sides or more or less, whatever. You count these odds, and this is the math, and here's my graph. So please take me as I am.
I see a commercial opportunity here. You bringing out like a coin with 6 sides for people to explain variance to their parents and loved ones that don't support their poker careers. What do you think?
Sure,
Where
sounds like a plan.
like when you started out, what were like some of your goals in poker and your expectations? Like, how did that? Yeah, what were kind of your thoughts around that when you're starting out?
Oh well, I think I've tried all the possible, goal settings, strategies, and directions to move and things to believe in while doing that. The first one was monetary for sure. I just wanted to make some money because I come not from a rich family, and we've spent like 10 years living in a 1-bedroom apartment with my parents, with in a rented apartment. So I kind of always had the desire to make money, to get not rich, let's call it wealthy, it's a more correct way, to be able to satisfy my needs and to have a freedom, because this is one of the most important things for me in my life. So from the first goal, it was purely monetary, and I remember playing in L25, having some hardships, and I thought like, okay, this game has so much stress, so much variance. All I want is just to make $3,000 per month, or what? For an L25, I think it was less, like maybe $750, something like that, and then it would be fine for me. I can relax and then just play this game and study, and once I complete my study, I'll do something else. But then, while climbing up the stakes, making more money, and then at some point, I've started making more money than I actually wanted, and I realized that with it's called in economics, it's called the marginal utility, I think. The best way to explain it, if you're hungry, you eat one cake, you feel 10 out of 10 satisfaction, but if you eat 5 or 6 with each new cake, you feel less and less, and then it becomes negative. So I think the same concept is applicable to money, and after reaching some point, it doesn't really make your life happier or doesn't make you more free. So I've had these moments of understanding that if I keep motivating myself by the money only, I will not move forward, and it doesn't motivate me. It doesn't make me tick anymore.
Did you also maybe have the experience that, let's say, for example, your goal is to set out and win $750? Did you ever have a month where, like, oh, the first week in, I ran hot, won $750, I don't have to play for the rest of the month?
I can't recall that. I think I would definitely relax and get um complacent and play worse, thinking that I became the god of poker until I was proved that I'm so far from it. But I don't remember like not playing anymore after winning the X amount.
Do you recall, or when was like the moment in your career where you decided to go all in on poker? You mentioned, I think, that you were also studying. When was like the moment where you reflected on like, no, okay, it's only going to be poker from now on because I'm making way too much money playing this game and I'm enjoying it way too much?
So I think I would partially like agree with that statement, because when that moment happened, it wasn't about that I make enough money. It was that I like this game. I really enjoy it so much. It was in 2012, I think, when I have finally finished I have graduated, and then I've gotten this free time, because while being a student, I couldn't study as much as I wanted, and I always wanted to have like 6 hours at least per day to study to play poker, and I could do like 2 or 3. So at that point, I felt super happy, super free, and those times were some of the best in my career.
6 hours a day of studying. What
Or
does what?
playing.
Or playing. I was like,
Yeah,
okay,
just
what do you spend?
together.
Okay, so you could spend 6 hours in poker. I was gonna ask like 6 hours of poker studying early in your career. What did you? There were no solvers back then, so I was kind of curious. Like, what would you spend 6 hours of studying on? Um, Adam, do you remember like the first big success moment in your career where you're like, oh my god, no, it's gonna be poker for me. Fuck everything else that I'm doing.
Yeah, my story is quite interesting because I got a one-way flight to Thailand, was pretty broke, clubbed up with some friends to kind of share a bankroll. And my kind of thing was, can I have enough money to support myself, first of all, to continue going? That was kind of the first 3 to 6 months of, yes, I think I can pay the bills. Yes, I can pay the rent. Yes, I can keep my head afloat. And then once I got past that phase, it was like, can I earn money to kind of set myself up for the future? And for me, I was thinking, can I get 10K bankroll? And I think it was when I started playing NL 60 or NL hundreds where I got my bankroll to 10K, and I was like, I'm the richest I've ever been. This could maybe work. And then that kind of like opened up what's next, what opportunities. And it created enough comfort for myself where I could see myself doing it long term. And I stopped worrying about the kind of day-to-day bills and started thinking, what level's next? And kind of looking up and on the progression. So it kind of happened a little bit organically, a bit of survival needs at first. And then kind of got my head afloat and was like, wait a second, maybe there's opportunities here. But yeah, I think it's always interesting to see how people's journeys get started. And for you, Sergii, I'm really interested to kind of map out your kind of career path, because so far we've got you graduating from university doing your economics. We've got you playing NL10 with a bit of a nitty strategy. And I want to map out your journey all the way to NL40K. So can you talk us through the early successes you had when you started moving up the levels? How were you approaching your strategy and poker overall in terms of progressing, in terms of building your bankroll, moving up levels? What was your approach in your early days?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I've started playing online using all the free materials available on Poker Strategy, just reading and watching these videos on demand, everything that was available, pretty much, reading blogs. And it took me like 1 year to get to NL100. It wasn't that hard online. I had pretty decent win rates from the very beginning. But then I remember not being able to beat NL100 for a very long time, almost maybe 9 months, something like that. And what helped me was working with a coach. I found a person who actually met in real life, and we became friends after. And he kind of gave me some insights that I could not notice, could not see, could not understand myself, and that had given me the boost to move up to beat that stake finally. And then NL200 starts at the point when I finish my university. I'm totally free. I have from 6 to 8 hours every day to devote to poker and sports, and just feeling extremely happy because I hated university. I hated being, forced to go there and to spend time with tutors who I did not really respect. Like, I remember my business teacher would tell me like, yo, you will graduate and then you can come and work for $500 a month. If you do everything good, in 5 years, you will have like $1,000 salary. And I remember him himself, living in a dormitory, I think, of the university. And I was thinking like something does not add up. Like, if this is success, I don't want to do that. I'm gonna try something else. And poker became that something else.
So for
So
you, you
yeah.
said you got stuck at NL 100s for 9 months. So I'm interested to dive into that a little bit. So what were some of the issues you were running into, and what were you experiencing? I think also you mentioned in the questionnaire we prepared for you that psychology and mindset was one of your weak points coming into poker specifically. So yeah, I'm curious to know, during this point when you were struggling to make things work at NL 100s, what were some of the things you were experiencing? What were some of the obstacles you were trying to overcome?
Well, given your expertise in psychology, I think you would enjoy this answer, because I say that I have a very bad, base ground fundamentals psychologically to be a successful poker player. I used to have, tilt problems. Not that I would break anything, but I would make a lot of spewy plays, just make a lot of mistakes, feel super stressed, have some ego problems, like wanted to compete even though I cannot win, etc. And I think I could defeat those demons only somewhere in 2000, maybe 18. And that's a long journey, 7 years. I would say that I couldn't deal with my psychological leaks. So that was something that stopped me a lot because I have some friends who are very calm by their nature, who don't really tilt, who don't really feel anger when somebody wins. They don't take that shit personally, and I used to. And then they've gotten more successful much faster. So I think that was one of the obstacles.
Yeah, I think this would be interesting to dive a bit deeper into. So, in terms of the tilt in particular and the ego issues that you were battling, how are they showing up at the tables? How is it affecting your day-to-day grind and also your ability to play higher?
Oh, just making mistakes because that motherfucker won against you again. Is he trying to exploit you? Is he what? He thinks he's the best, especially when you lose to somebody who you view to be a worse player. Like bomb hunters, for example, people with 42, 43 1 soft lap only play with the fish, and then they come and then they win some pots against you, and you're like, what the hell? Poker is not fair, and that's one of the cornerstone mistakes and cognitive biases that people have. Like poker owes you something. No, it's not. It does not. So yeah, this is the thing I can recall very brightly.
Yeah, and I can relate to that in terms of like the personalization of everything feels like it's you versus them in a very like kind of visceral way at times. And you mentioned like how you would like label this guy. Some people like label someone as a bully, or this guy gets lucky against me, and you make it like you versus them, and then you almost like battle against them in a kind of very personal way rather than just a strategy way. And then you mentioned like the kind of the not being fair aspect as well, which I'm sure everyone can relate to. The poker gods being against you and how probabilities just don't feel fair as a kind of, I'm a good player, I deserve to win, and when I don't, it creates issues. So for you, in terms of, you had a long journey to work through these. You mentioned like 2012-ish, you were going more full time, and then 2018 to kind of correct a lot of these mindset issues. It didn't slow you down too much because you moved up pretty quickly and pretty high, but what was the things you had to work through to find some resolution to now you've got more of a solid mindset? What were some of the things you had to work on to remove some of that personalization and kind of victimhood?
I think it was the realization of the importance of psychology at some point, because psychology, I mean, I would give it easily 50, maybe 40% of your success in poker. And well, almost everyone, if you ask people like, is psychology important? They would say yes, but they would, understand it logically, but not on a deep emotional level that would actually push them to start working on it, because working in your psychological leagues could be as hard as studying the solver. You need to find a person who you trust, and you need to read a lot of books on psychology, and both of these things are hard, especially if you spend a lot of your energy on poker. I remember when I was grinding the most, I would not have any capacity, any energy to read after those sessions. It was very hard. I could only read, complicated, hard books, hard materials during the days off because, yeah, had no energy. So psychology could not be overestimated. And if you are starting out playing poker or playing the lower stakes, it is never late to find a good psychologist, start working together, or try some books at first, at least. Jared Tendler, both books were great. I've had a lot of insights from them. And then I remember Elliot's Raw course, A Game Poker, I think it's called. And I watched it when I was already, an L2K plus regular, and I've learned some things from there still, like, I would say, maybe not a lot, but enough to have some quality changes in my play for sure. And then working with some different psychologists online, just trying to fix your demons.
Yeah, I think that's the thing as well. It's making it a path of learning, growing, and evolving with your mindset overall. And as you mentioned, a lot of players either don't put the time into it, or they just don't think it's important enough to kind of work on coincide alongside their strategy. Or like you said, you didn't have the energy because you were grinding so much that you didn't have the kind of time or bandwidth to absorb any more kind of new content. So yeah, I think it's understanding like where your leaks are and how much value you will gain from improving them. It sounds like for you, at some point, the pain points of having these mental game issues started to want it to be resolved, and you realize, wait a second, maybe there's a solution to this. I think some people as well can get a little bit caught up in this is my personality, this is how I am, it's okay for other people, but I'm just one of those people who gets a bit tilted at these episodes. I think it's understanding you can always work on these things. They're always like the skills, there's tools, there's ways of approaching life in poker that can be upgraded, so to speak. So it sounds like for you, you did a lot of different things to upgrade your mindset and psychology overall. Is there anything that stands out as one thing or a thing that you learned early on that really helped you? Anything that you almost like learn about yourself or how you were thinking about stuff that helped you to move forward?
Well, regarding psychology, I would definitely name Jared Tendler's book, the first one. Second was not written at the time when I read the first one, and I would take notes and actually study them, and then it inspired me to start a diary where I would write all the psychological mistakes I had every day, and I would have like a few, fat diaries in a couple of years. So it helped a lot for sure.
Mental hand histories. Yeah, shout out to Jared Tendler. I think after probably 15 years, he's still got one of the best mindset poker books around, The Mental Game of Poker 1 and 2. And I think a lot of players who haven't delved into mindsets, they see a lot of relatability to it because he talks about mindsets issues from the context of being a poker player, which is very unique, all the different tilts you experience. And most people who read the book go, oh, I can relate to that one. That one's me. I relate to this issue and the tools. And as you mentioned, that kind of that hand history of mental game issues that come up and keeping a log of that, even that process opens up your eyes to all the things that you're doing wrong that come from mental game leaks, which you might have thought were strategy leaks. So I just want to segue now into your rise. So we've currently got you at 200 NL, you finished your graduation, and tell me through like how you started to go up to the higher stakes. First of all, what was the drive behind wanting to play higher, and how are you moving up stakes from 200s all the way to 5Ks?
Let's try to break these drives into a few categories. So one of them was monetary still, because after reaching some level that was totally comfortable, you want more. You get on this hedonic treadmill when you start running. The faster you run, the faster you have to run. So at that point, I thought like, okay, I've satisfied my needs, but I want more. So that was one of the drivers. Another one was, I don't know if you can call it ego, because when you see, players who you can outplay, you just want to win, you just want to defeat them. It's not a very good mindset. It's a dark energy, dark kind of motivation that I would call it. It makes, this is the anger that gives you the fuel. It's not good for a personality in the long run. It gives you a lot of stress, a lot of suffering, mental suffering as well, because, well, it's done through the negative emotions. But at the same time, it gives you a lot of energy. Like, it pushes you to study, to wake up every day, 2-3 hours, sitting in Flopzilla, going through hands, because you have to prove that you can actually beat everyone who you think you can beat. And if you lose, it gives you even more anger. But yeah, you have to pay for that type of approach by, feeling not very happy and not being a very happy person, I think.
And how was this driving you to move up stakes? So you mentioned the kind of wanting more financial abundance and wealth as you categorize it for yourself, and then the ego of trying to prove to yourself to beat other people, and kind of the pros and cons of that kind of energy. How was that driving you to move forward? What were some of the early success you were having as you were moving up to mid stakes? We'll call it, say, NL 200 to NL 1Ks. Any challenges you faced on those levels, and how were you progressing to learn the strategy to beat those games?
Well, the way I've progressed, I remember having a very, tough discipline. I was living by myself at the time, and I would have a very strict schedule. When I wake up, I make a breakfast, then I go play a session, then I work X hours, then I do some sports, and then I do X hours of theory again, and repeat for like 6 days every week for a couple of years. Plus, I think somewhere at that point, I've got interested in finances, financial literature. I've started reading some books, understanding where does the financial independence come from. I've realized that, making few $1,000s a month is good, but what are you gonna do when you're in your 60s? And especially if you live in a country like Ukraine, when the government, not just Ukraine, like every pretty much post-Soviet country, when you don't get any high pensions or government would not ever bail you out if you're broke. Like if you're broke, good luck, boy. So I had to think about it and ask myself, okay, what am I going to do in 20 years, in 30 years, if I make few couple of $1,000 a month and then I spend X, how am I going to compound that stuff? So I've realized that there are some, financial goals to be achieved, and then I've set them, I've written them on a paper and started moving towards them. Plus, enjoying the game at the same time, having a lot of passion in it, but at the same time having some moments of like hating this game, wanting to quit. I think I quit poker 2 or 3 times during my career, so now is the third time as a player.
Why was that? What caused you to quit?
Well, the first time I quit, I remember it was 2000. It was to the end of 2017, and that year was hard for me because I forced myself too much, way too much. I would work a lot, like study a lot, play a lot, and it did not bring me happiness. And my playing style, it was more about a very good game selection, not reg warring at that time at all, and just trying, to make money. So pretty much, money was my only was the only motivator at that time. I did not feel a lot of competitiveness because if you look at the poker career, it's not like it is the same or stable all the time. Sometimes you want to compete, sometimes you don't, sometimes you want to make more money, sometimes you don't care about money. So I remember at least the second half of 2017, every morning would start to me the same way. I would wake up at 5 a.m. With the alarm in Thailand, open my notes, and read my long term goals, which said, I will not quit this game until I make $1 million. And at that time, I did not get the joy from poker. I was just pretty much forcing myself. But still, I had, something to prove to myself, so I kept going. And I remember 31st December, I played of 2017. I played probably the last session at that time. And the next morning, early morning, we meet with Lucky CPS and Stefan for a breakfast. And we talk, we discuss some hands. I remember this game like super brightly because then I come back home, I start calculating my results and my bankroll because the year has passed, and I see that I've reached my goal. I have like more than $1 million. And at that point, I close like all the clients, I delete everything, and I just quit like the same moment. I don't talk about poker anymore. And it lasts for like 3 months. So for the next 3 months, I would do nothing about poker. I never thought about it. I never wanted to come back, just nothing. I would just read a lot of different books, do sports, walk, spend time with friends, but just forget about poker, never wanting to come back. But
Very
then
interesting.
yeah,
Okay.
but then I realized, like, dude, you know what? It's like 2018 and $1 million in 2018. It's not something that would kind of make you financially independent. But on a more serious note, 3 months of a lifestyle like that, when you don't think about money, you have some financial pillow, whatever. Other things come to your realization that for human, it is normal to work. It's normal to do something, and you have some potential, you have to realize it, otherwise you're not going to feel happy. And I realized that my potential was not realized in poker, and there is a long way to go. Yes, I won the X amount of money, but did I really do my best? Did I really build the best version of myself? Well, hell no. I was just a pretty good player uh, who made the X amount of money. So then I realized that, well, I'm not done with the poker. I have to come back, but I have to do it on the next level. I have to change the way I was doing things. So I remember talking to like a CPS, Stefan, and then the third guy. He's less known in the English-speaking world, but he's a great theoretician and a very smart player. His name on Stars is Morphology, I think. On Russian-speaking forums, his name is Booty in your face. So shouts to Booty. Yeah. And I've asked them if I could work with them together again, and that I was ready to work 8 hours every day, that I want to hire a mnemonics coach to try some new approaches, how to memorize stuff. Just try everything and try to apply some knowledge that I've gotten from the other books that I've read, and like being super motivated, wanting to get reach the very top, to become like top 10 in the world. Let's go.
Love it. And yeah, very interesting how you almost like complete one goal. It's like climbing the mountain. And when you got there, it was almost like an end of chapter, complete closure. And it left you in this kind of period for 3 months where you didn't really know what you wanted to do or what your next target was. And then from there, from that space, the next mountain appeared, which was back to poker, but with a different goal, different purpose to become a better version of yourself on that journey. Yeah, it's really interesting how we can, from the outside, look like we're on the same path, doing the same goal, but it completely changes what you're trying to achieve from that kind of journey. And yeah, it sounds like for you, like the first mountain was climbed, now the second one was presenting itself. Very curious to know that in our kind of research for this podcast, there was a article about you, and it mentions your high points and things you're most proud of. And one of them was self-reflection and the ability to work efficiently on your mistakes. You mentioned this is like kind of a superpower for yourself. I'm curious to know what that process looks like for you. How do you self-reflect, and how do you efficiently learn from your mistakes throughout your career?
Okay, so the principle is super easy. It's taken from the cognitive behavioral psychology. Whenever something happens in your life that makes you feel bad or not satisfied, and it was not your fault, it did not depend on you, and it means that probably your perception of reality is wrong, that something is wrong with it. If things that do not depend on you make you feel upset, like this is not correct, this is not how the world should work. So then you try to analyze it. You write down, first thing is the stimuli, like what was the event? Well, the only one thing I can recall right now, to give you a bright example, was when I returned to Kiev after like 10 years, 7 years of not spending any time in Ukraine, renting an apartment. And I remember I would go for a breakfast in a small local cafe. And I see two beautiful girls sitting on a next table. And I was like, hey, I have to like approach them. I have to ask their name. One of them, maybe two would be too much for this time. So yeah, I have to get her number. I have to come up and approach her. And then all these like obstacles in my head arise. Like, hey, you just moved to this place. What if they say no and waiters see that? What will they think about you? How embarrassing would it be? Like, are you sure you want to do that? Like, who even does that in the 21st century, dude? There is what Tinder, whatever. So I obviously do not approach them. I miss that. And then I go on my back home and I feel so like angry at myself, like so ashamed, realizing like, what the hell, this thinking is so wrong. I had to do that. But to connect this thing on both the logical and the emotional levels, I had to run this analysis, like a hand history, life hand history. When you write on a paper, like event, I did not approach two girls. Then why do I think that this is not right? Why do I think that my perception of reality at that point was skewed or twisted? And then I write, because, well, first of all, there is nothing wrong of approaching two young girls, saying hello, what, blah, 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 etc., asking them for their number. Second, even if you get rejected, it's fine. I mean, everyone gets rejected. It's the part of the game. It's totally fine. You cannot win in this game any other way. You just have to get through it. Come on, these are the rules. Do it. And then, like, number three, what should I do to actually fix it? So pretty simple. But the thing is, it doesn't work that way. Like, you write it down and aha, it fixed. You have to actually go through it many times and then just repeat and analyze and then try to change at least, a centimeter, move a centimeter forward to be a little bit better, thinker and actor in that case than you were before.
Yeah, so I love that. And you need to, first of all, as you mentioned, map out the whole trigger or stimulus response, how you're acting and how you would like to act in future. But then at some point, you need to put it together with actual repetition, and you need to go up to another set of girls and go, right, next set of girls, next time I go up, I'm gonna ask for a number, and then you try again, and maybe you fail again, you didn't ask for the number again, and then again you go, okay, what did I learn from the second ago? Okay, I failed 2 times, again, I didn't speak to them. And yeah, I think in poker as well, anything in life, you've got to have repetitions of trying to override your response to the trigger. So the way I look at it, there's a trigger response relationship, and often the meaning you give an event is what holds it together. You need to identify the ones which aren't in alignment with where you want to be in life or how you want to behave, spot them, get really clear on it, and then you've got to come up with the new kind of behavior you want to do in future. But then you need to run drills, train and practice till that becomes the new default behavior. So for you in the girl scenario, you need to go up to 20 sets of girls and speak to every single one of them until that becomes, yes, that's the default, got it down. And it comes from conceptual. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle, where they can often either overcomplicate the process of mapping it out or not want to map it out, and then not realize, okay, it's not fixed until you've actually got some real life experience in the trenches of actually coming to terms with the emotions. Because in the process of writing things out, it's all logical and it's all just, yes, this is what to do, this is what I should do. But in the moment, now you've got emotions, now you've got insecurity, now you've got a little bit of sweat in the body, and you're like, oh, maybe today's not a good day. And you've got to learn to overcome all of those. So yeah, I think understanding that process, and I think as you've mentioned as well, like these skills are super important for all of life. Like identifying the things that cause you to act in ways you aren't happy with, keeping this kind of mental hand history, coming up with a solution to change that, and then yeah, running repetitions to get better at it. So yeah, I think it's a good life lesson. Even though we're talking about picking up girls, I think the approach applies to changing your poker strategy and dealing with emotions and tilt at the tables as well. So yeah, I want to segue now a little bit into reg battling. And I know for yourself, you had a lot of experience reg battling, especially at 10Ks and as you were working up, reg warring, I think you call it. So for you, I want to know the mindset that is different for playing regulars and reg warring compared to just a normal grind. And I want to go into this because I think we've talked about kind of moving up stakes a lot with different guests, but we haven't really dived into the difference of the mindset needed to battle the best players at a certain level and be competitive with them to either beat them or to get a win rate. And I think for you, I think you've had experience of going into this kind of world. So yeah, I want to know, like for you, what was the main chapters of your career where you were doing a lot of reg warring, and what was the mindset you needed to actually come out on top of those reg wars?
Well, I think the most important thing that people might overlook or not pay enough attention when it comes to rag wars is that you have to really, really, really try to get into your opponent's head. So you have to like get the hand history, analyze it, and then you have to play a small number of tables, because if you play too many tables, you cannot notice the timing tells, which can be very essential, and you need to make notes, to confirm them in the future. Like, is this timing tell true, or was it just because the guy went to drink some water? So if you catch him doing the same thing again, you can write it down and then exploit it. And you need to be fully present. It's very hard to play a reg war if you play few different opponents at the same time, few different tables. So before starting the session, at some point I was like forcing myself, I was not allowing myself to play a reg war if I had more than X tables running, and then I would just have to close something. I did not allow myself to play more than, I think, 2 or 3 tables of reg wars at the same time. So I tried to be very, very present and to analyze, to not join games where I did not have the information about my villains. So if I only had some basic idea about his play, I would probably not play. But it depends, if I think that his overall strategy is weaker, then I would definitely play. But if I think that he's playing better than me, then I would avoid those games. So it's like rag war bomb hunting, if we can call it like that. I don't think it's correct, because you still get to play lots of games where there is no big edge. Like, I did not have big edge in those games. In some of the lineups I had, well, the maximum maybe 2, maybe 3 BB edge, sometimes 0, sometimes negative, like -1 BB or -2. But it still would pay off if there is a fish in a lobby. Plus, the idea of the rag war is to get the tables. Like, if you play against people and they realize that they are losing to you and they don't want to continue, they just leave, and then you get to sit at the table. So this is one of the objectives as well. So you get to play with fish more often without having to be fully concentrated all the time in the lobby.
Are there any reg wars that come to mind where an opponent was getting the better of you and you were struggling to deal with that? Because I know of myself, having done some reg battling myself, I know how much it hurts when you're losing to the same opponent day after day, and you're fighting this real kind of visceral battle of trying to out strategy him. And if you're losing that battle, it's one of the kind of the worst experiences, in my opinion, as a poker player. So for yourself, any battles that come to mind where you were losing to an opponent, and what did you learn for that process, or what did you go through?
Yeah, the one that comes to my mind is playing against. Well, it was not the reg war in 6 max. It was fighting for tables, playing heads up against Antoja 1998. Uh, in 6 max games, I would study his game. I would understand him really well, and I had a lot of like notes and ideas how to play against him. But then starting to play at heads up, going into the field, I would just get beaten and realize like, okay, in heads up, you can keep it, because I could not outplay him. I would just keep losing to him, even though I thought that I had an edge. The practice showed that I did not. Or another example, there was a bot on ACR. His name was 2BTC on Red, and maybe you guys heard about that guy, or Bloody Wolf on Chico, I think, before, like some famous Russian bot who got banned maybe not long time ago. So I would analyze his game and then try to give him a fight, try to exploit his leaks. And once again, I had a list of the leaks I thought I would exploit, but then I just start playing against him and get beaten and like, okay, you can take it.
Mm-hmm. What were some of the lessons you learned through reg warring that you wouldn't have learned if you just bum hunted?
I think one of the cool lessons, which is not super obvious, is that it forces you to play the best game you can. Like it actually forces you to play, on 2 tables, being 100% present, thinking about ranges, visualizing them on every street. It makes you think on a deeper level than you usually do when you play tables with fish, when you just play your ABC, or maybe a bit more complex than that strategy, but then your objective is the fish, obviously. You don't really try hard. But against regulars, you have to find the edge in every spot possible, so you have to force yourself. And you get tired really fast. Like it's impossible to play, well, at least for me, to reg war for many hours. I would just get, burned out.
Yeah, it's that level of intensity, which is just different. Everything's just dialed up. There's just smaller edges everywhere. And yeah, you're trying to exploit them. They're trying to exploit you at the same time. There's a lot of intentionality with your strategy and trying to keep on top of everything as they're trying to keep on top of everything with you as well. So yeah, I can relate to that as well, how draining and tiring it is when you're playing, yeah, especially an aggressive opponent who's putting you in tough spots and making the game tree quite complicated for you.
Hi guys, Rene aka the Wacko here with a quick Mechanics of Poker 2.0 announcement. In our program you will get access to 80 plus hours of content in which we will explain you all aspects needed in order to become a more successful poker player. Now one of these of course is the technical aspect of the game, in which I'll be explaining you all the mechanics behind poker strategies. We'll be talking about GTO, exploitative play, with an extra focus on the why behind certain strategies and why the population has certain leaks. And to increase your win rate even further, we've recently added a river bluff and bluff catching section so you can increase your EV when those pots become very big. Our mindset and performance coach Adam Carmichael, he took care of the mental game and performance section of this program, in which he will teach you everything you need to know in order to break through limiting beliefs, better handle your emotions, break free from tilt, and play your A game more consistently. And last but not least, we've added the management and optimization section in the program, in which we will give you various tips and tricks to make it more likely for your poker career to succeed, and how to continuously improve as a poker player. Now on top of that, this concept is continuously evolving based on feedback and suggestions we get from our community. Next to all this content, you will have access to our exclusive Discord community, monthly live Q&A calls, and one-on-one coaching session in which we are going to be reviewing if you have been implementing the stuff that we teach you in the Mechanics of Poker correctly. So do you think you have what it takes to master the mechanics of poker? Go over to mechanicsofpoker.com and maybe you will get a chance to work with me and Adam and make more progress in your poker career. But for now, without further ado, let's get back into more goodness in today's episode.
So for you, what would you say was the high points of your poker career to this date? So we've got this Reg War, and I think this was NL10K where you did a lot of battling. What would you say was the highest point as you've climbed up from NL10 all the way to the highest stakes? What was the best point for you?
Okay. I don't know if I can call it the best point for me because I try to rate everything in my life from the perspective of happiness. Like, how happy does it make me feel, whatever I do at this moment? So, if we talk about poker success, then the best moments were for sure the last year of my poker career. I remember the summer of 2020 when I thought that okay, playing poker is fun, making money is fun, high stakes, good and that, but I want like more. I want to actually become top 3 in the world. I did not say top 1 because there was Stefan and Linus, and I was like, fuck them. I'm not going to outplay Stefan. Well, I know Stefan for many years. I think he's one of the most talented players and a very hardworking players as well. So I kind of did not have those ideas that I could, win him if he actually tries to outcompete me in this like long distance reg war or the Linus. I didn't actually get to play a lot with Linus because we played in the completely different time zone, but I studied his game a lot, and yeah, he's a one of the greatest players ever, obviously. So my objective would be, okay, can I get to top 3? And if I can, what do I need to do for that? So I made the plan. I've got a list of spots that I want to study, and I decided that I give myself 100 days to study theory only from 6 to 8 hours every day with a day off, of course, and then I would play only one session in a week just to stay sharp, and all the other time I would just do the theory. And I was like very motivated by this desire to prove to myself, first of all, if I can be the best, if I can be in a top 10. And I've learned a lot about the game at that point. I actually went through that challenge. I don't remember how many hours of theory it took, maybe from 4 to 600 hours. I don't remember for sure, but I had a plan. I've completed it like 90%. I felt extremely strong at that time, like Reg Warren playing the short stack, like seeing many spots where I had the edge. I studied the short stack play for many hours, and I realized that many people play it, but they don't really understand it. So I was, very, very motivated. But then I've kind of reached the point of the health breakdown when like many things happen at once. Like my sleep had totally was totally broken. And an interesting fact to mention, it's not fixed even by now. I still have some problems with sleep. So because I was overpressuring myself and working extremely hard, and then my health just started to fall apart in some areas, and I was getting very unhappy by that lifestyle. I realized that, like, why the hell am I even doing that? So at some point I had a session with a psychologist, and then he asked me, like, have you considered to just quit this game? And just to give you the perception of what was going on, we were talking about how to deal with tilt, and he has given me this advice, like, go to a cheap Chinese shop and buy some glasses, and then just break them and scream in the house. Try that. I was like, sounds like a great idea, let's do it. So I've tried many things, and what I've ended up with, being not very happy and having a very bad sleep, some lower back problems. And I realized that if you have some health issues, it's very hard to feel happy. It's very hard to feel happy when you feel the pain all the time. So I thought that maybe I should just step down and the hell with it. I'll just concentrate on coaching and see where it will lead me.
Interesting. So I'm curious to know, with this quite extreme approach of the 6 to 8 hours of theory and then the one day of playing, how did that work in practice? I'm just asking that question as I see a lot of players who potentially study a lot but don't play much. They end up creating this massive gap between their knowledge and theory and understanding and the game they can actually execute in game. It's almost like they lack this performance sharpness because they've got so much ideas they've learned, but they actually haven't played enough volume to kind of solidify those new ideas. So I'm curious to know with you, when you've got this kind of really high amount of study hours in only one day of playing, how was that working in practice in terms of your ability to execute the strategy that you were learning?
Well, I think I had a huge background of the practice, if we can call it, a huge hours, a very many, oh, sorry, many hours of practice. I've requested my hands on Poker Stars just recently, and the lifetime volume was like 2.5 or 2.4 million of hands, and it was just one of the 8 rooms that I played, and I never multi-tabled a lot, usually 6 tables or less, maybe more on the earlier stages, but definitely not the last few years. So I've had a lot of practice, and I think the problem with theoreticians is that they don't really have those hours. They kind of play sometimes, but study a lot, and they then don't get to test those things in real life. And theory is very different, when you work in solo and then when you play against people. Yes, concepts work the same way, but if you don't understand how people deviate, then you end up with copying the solver. You're not playing GTO, you're just playing your vision of GTO, your perception of GTO, which is very far from the real GTO because, I mean, no matter how many hours you study, you cannot reach the prowess of playing like a solver. So you kind of play that copycat strategy that is targeted to reach the equilibrium against the solver that knows your strategy. And when you do that against people, you end up slightly losing or playing, breaking even if you do some exploits at least. So it doesn't really work. It's very easy to just open the hand history, put on the smart face and say, okay, solver does this, solver does that, that's why we do this. But without the practice, it's just not a winning strategy.
So what were you doing differently to avoid that trap? What were you doing with your approach to studying that stopped you trying to replicate the solver and spending too much time in theory? How did you create that practicality with your approach?
Well, I've spent immense number of hours thinking about how should a perfect study algorithm, well, not perfect, but the best study algorithm look like, what works and what doesn't, because I had some friends who played lower stakes and who would work like 12 hours in Paya Solar every day for a long time, but then just not being able to move higher than an L200. And I've spent a lot of time asking questions like, what should I do? Should I do this or not? And I've tried different approaches, different ways to study theory, to analyze spots, how to remember spots in the best way. Sometimes I would, spend 10 hours trying to analyze one board, and then I would really not learn anything new. But then I would spend the 2 hours doing things differently, and I would learn much more. So I've just I started to craft my approach, trying learning from errors, and then trying it with my students as well, because I've been coaching as a part-time job, if we call it like that, since 2015, making some breaks and having groups for the long-term coaching since 2018, I think. And then I would try and see if my students can learn the same way I do. And I've learned that people are different, and my approach that is perfect for me, it may not be perfect for some of my students. They have to tweak it, they have to change it a little bit. So it took a lot of time to try and repeat.
I'll leave it to Rene to go deeper into picking your brains on your unique approach to studying. But I just want to ask you one thing around motivation and rising up the stakes, because again, researching for this podcast, you mentioned one of the most critical factors in moving up stakes was motivation and the desire to achieve my goals at all costs. So for you, talk us through how this function for you, because I think you've mentioned previously how it's kind of driven you to want to get better, to make money, to beat other people. But talk us through how this insatiable desire and motivation was so critical for you to have the success you've had.
You know, as a psychologist, someone who's a background in psychology, you definitely know that different things motivate different people. And for someone, the fear of death could be like the best motivator. For other person, it might not do as much job. For someone, this is could be the anger. For the other person, could be money. But money, I think, it cannot motivate anyone on a very long run, if you think about it. On a short run, sure, but on long run, I think it's not even possible that I don't think we can find any great athletes who were motivated by money only. I don't think it's possible. From what I've read and from my experience, at least. I may be wrong, though. So I remember this notion that, like, the idea that I've gotten, that if you got no way to retreat, if there is no way to retreat, like during the ancient wars when Greek generals would burn their ships, so there is no way to retreat, you have to die or to prevail. So I would pretty much try to put myself on a similar mindset, and I would say, like, fuck it, I will achieve it or I will die. I mean, like, there is no way out. I'll just do it. There is just no other option. So being very harsh on myself, but it what was working for me. I'm not saying that it is the optimal strategy or that it would work for other people. For some, for sure, but for others, not.
Yeah, I think you touched on something very important there of understanding what motivates and drives you to get to where you want to get to in life overall. And you mentioned that kind of do or die mentality, the no plan B, I'm going to make this work at all costs. And for you, during that particular chapter of your career, that worked perfectly because it allowed you to tap into energy reserves to make it work. For other people, like, they may break down or become overwhelmed, but they'll have, I think almost everyone has some motivational drive they can tap into, whether it's to have success for themselves, success for their family, whether it's to achieve whatever outcomes, whether it's to become the best version of themselves and reach their full potential. There's some level you can tap into a motivational driver that allows you to really push yourself and really get the most out of yourself. So yeah, I'm glad you shared with us your do or die mentality and achieve success at all costs. I'm sure a lot of listeners will also resonate with that as their drive. Other people will be like, that's not me. I need to think about what actually motivates me to want to have the success that I want to have in life. Now, we almost touched on your approaches to studying, which I know Rene would be very curious to get deeper into. So I'm going to pass over to Rene to ask questions about your approach to working on your technical game as you progress your career. So over to you, Rene.
Actually, I have one question for you, Adam, in the meanwhile. I just wrote it down because you mentioned, like, people have different drives. I was listening here on the sideline, and I was also reflecting, like, my drive and what drives me. And I feel like it also changes a lot. And to be honest, for myself, I'm still sort of questioning it, like, what actually does really drive me. So, question for you, Adam, how does one find out what drives them?
I think it first of all starts about understanding who you want to be identity-wise. So the version of yourself you want to be. So at certain times of your life, you might want to be the high-stakes poker player. You might want to be the family man. You might want to be the free spirit who lives a life of abundance. So you've got to understand, like, some sort of aspirational identity you want to be. And I also think you need to understand your values. What are the core values you have? I think everyone, if you spend some time with it, you could narrow down your personality down to 3 to 5 values. So it could be growth, achievement, relationships, health, and really understand the cocktail of kind of values that are in alignment with you. And then you've got to understand what makes you tick, the why behind what you do. And this is where you've got to do some exploring. So yeah, I think if you can just spend some time on the identity that you want to step into, normally in alignment with the goals you're trying to achieve at that time, it's almost like the character you need to be to win the game that you're currently playing. If you think of life as upgrading your character to achieve certain goals and win games that you're currently playing, and then the values, and the values are always about the things that make you happy, the things that intrinsically drive you, motivate you, and you'll realize when you're out of alignment, when you feel unfulfilled on the path. So for example, if you're grinding every day like Sergii was, and you start to feel unfulfilled on that process, you're likely neglecting some of your values, whether it's health, whether it's relationships, whether it's growth in terms of learning other things. So your why is going to change, I think, over time. But the main thing is this kind of understanding your values, alignment with that, and striving towards a new identity. I think if you get those things somewhat in alignment and you're reflecting on how you're feeling on the process towards your goals and outcomes, I think that creates over time the purpose and the kind of why, what you're moving towards.
Is this then also kind of where role models come in? So let's say you have guys that you look up to. Will they be in line with the identity or the future identity that you have for yourself?
usually you relate to people who have an aspirational identity that you would like to at least tap into certain parts of their character traits. So you're like, oh, I admire his confidence. I admire his work ethic, his ambition. There's something about them. So with your role models, it's actually very good to write the exact character traits you like, because every human's a multifaceted person. They've got good points, bad points, and you might go, I really like how driven he is. I really like his work ethic, but I don't really like how he is with his family. He seems like he's a single guy, doesn't really put any attention to family life. So I want to have those character traits, but I don't like that one. And yeah, I think you often, almost always, gravitate towards people you can learn from, you're entertained by, or they have aspirational identity traits that you can learn from or aspire to.
I remember in the conversation with Sergii, we talked a lot about your why. How much thought, Sergii, have you put into the identity? I remember you were reading, for example, for Haley's blog. Maybe that served as some of a role model within the profession, but you also mentioned that every day you just looked at, okay, I want to make $1 million. And then when you made $1 million, you quit poker. So I guess that was a goal, but it wasn't really in line with your values, kind of that Adam already touched on. How much thought did you put in, like, the identity that you have for yourself, and what are your current values, and how do you nowadays try to build your life around it, and how might that not have been in line in the past?
Okay. So that was a great question and a great answer by Adam, by the way. And I've read quite a few books on the topic of your purpose and your identity, and I think he has summarized it greatly. And regarding the role models, I'd say that well, it's one of the key things in my life to have a role model for each part of my life. For example, some people who are great poker players would be a role model how to play and approach this game. Some people who are kind with other people and respectful and have no anger would be a role model for me to change my personality to be more like them, to be a better person. And then some people who would, let's say, be super achievers in sport, who teach themselves to enjoy the discomfort and prevail no matter what, they would motivate me to do better in sports and partially in poker. So yeah, my answer would be that I always try to find a role model, and I have many of them. Well, maybe not many, but at least a few for different areas of life.
How do you then switch between the two? So for example, if I recall, when I was solely focused on poker and trying to become the best, yes, it would, that character, right, that would really help me in poker, but then outside of poker I would experience more difficulty. So how did you go about switching between certain characters in different environments? For example, maybe in a certain environment you want to be more loving, caring, and empathetic, but when I walk into my office I just want to be a killer.
Well, that's another great question. So, guys, another heads off, and thanks for inviting me for this podcast. I really enjoy it so far. So, that's the thing I've realized at the end of my career, that it is not possible for me to achieve my goals in poker, to be one of the best in the world, and to be aligned with the other values, because these things, they just do not work together, at least in my case. Because if you want to be the best in poker, like top 3, let's say, you have to sacrifice partially your relationship, partially your family time, time with your friends, your self-development. You cannot really progress in other areas. You cannot read a lot. And one of my deep values is, let's say, attraction to wisdom, if we can call it like that. So reading books, understanding the way this world, the way this reality works. So I've realized that it would not be possible to be the great poker player and do all that at the same time. So some role models are indeed incompatible, and you can just try to get a piece of that behavior, approach, mindset, but then you have to understand that if you get the whole picture, it would probably not work if you have some other goals that are not aligned with this one.
I remember I've done a lot of work with, you mentioned Jared, actually a lot. I've done many hours with Jared. Shout out to Jared Tendler. Also done many hours with other psychologists. I've switched psychologists multiple times. I feel like a psychologist can teach you maybe a certain way, a certain perspective, but then at some point I feel like the sessions become a bit boring, and then I switch and then I get new perspectives. I remember if you explain to psychologists who are not into poker and you explain about poker, they're like, are you sure you want to be the one of the best poker players in the world doesn't really seem like, you know, that's really great for your life outside of you sitting behind your PC. So a lot of the characteristic traits that I would then explain, like, oh, but I want to be like this, I want to be like this, so I can perform better at the poker tables. They would usually say, I don't think this is a great idea in terms of how you want to live your life as like a whole if you zoom out of poker. And I remember actually one of my reasons why I decided to steer into a different direction than to continue playing solely high stakes poker was actually also because of growth. I felt like it was growth but very one dimensional, and I figured I would have to start doing other things to grow in different directions. I wasn't really sure how and how that would look, but I figured, okay, I'm just going to put myself in different positions, and then I guess growth in different directions will follow. Now, this strategy has worked, but also has obviously some downsides, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. But yeah, I can definitely relate. You talked a lot about your journey. You talked a lot about personal development. You read a lot of books. I was curious, of the habits that you've developed and certain routines that you have established, which have been the biggest game changers for you in terms of increasing your performance?
I have a fun answer for this question. So accidentally, let's say accidentally, this idea appeared in my mind that I should track the level of my happiness every day. So by the end of the day, I would just write down a number from 0 to 10. How happy was this day lived? And then I would maybe leave some comments, like what made me angry or what made me happy, and etc. So every single day, I've been doing it since like 2018. And this idea actually appeared from poker because I would analyze every session of mine. When I've started playing high stakes actively, I would give myself grades in my psychology performance, in my technical performance, and some other things. So it struck me that why am I not doing the same thing about the happiness if happiness is the main thing in my life, one of the main things. Like there is no objective point in this life to me, but there is a subjective point that we create for ourselves. And to me, one of these things is happiness. So I've started tracking it down. And I remember meeting with for Haley. I've known him for like 10 years by now. And I haven't seen him in person for a couple of years. And then we met in 2021, and I remember just sitting in cafe, and then I asked him like, hey, I've been doing this thing for 2 years, what do you think about it, tracking your level of happiness? And he looks at me and like, I've been doing that for 3 years. And like, what the hell? I've read so many books about happiness, I've never seen it anywhere. Like, how did you get to this idea? So we laughed off it, and like having some reflections about this habit, I think it was one of the most important contributors to my increased level of happiness, if we can call it so.
So what were your findings out of your research?
Well, the funniest one was that the last year of my poker career, which was one of the most successful financially, and definitely the most successful technical wise, was one of my happiest years. Like the level of my happiness was something like 5.9 in a year on a scale from 1 to 10, which was like not really fun. And after seeing that, I've thought like, okay, if I'm living this life, I can die any moment. I mean, life is unpredictable. Is this the real life I want to live? Like being happy, 5.9 out of 10, playing poker, high stakes, being one of the best, trying to be one of the best. Like, is it even worth it? And yeah, that was one of the moments when I realized that obviously not, and that I would probably not return to my player career anymore because it just does not make me happy, unfortunately.
What have you found to be the biggest contributors to scoring closer to a 10 out of 10 on a daily basis?
Well, 10 out of 10 is not possible on a daily life basis. I remember walking with my friend and I asked him like, on a scale from 1 to 10, how happy do you think you are? And he's like, and I asked him, how happy do you feel right now? And he's like, 10. And then I asked him, dude, like when you have an orgasm, how do you feel? Like that is the 10 out of 10. Or when you, I don't know, try drugs, but let's not discuss drugs. Drugs are bad. Do not try
Okay,
them at
I
all.
felt a 10 out of 10 when I was using drugs. So my solution is I use drugs every day.
Yeah, but the idea was that people who don't really track it, they might really underestimate the level of their happiness. Like 10 is the most happy you ever, feel. You maybe have a 10 or maybe less moments like that in a year, or it maybe, I don't know, in a lifetime. Like when your baby is born, my baby was not born yet, so I don't know. But people say they feel absolutely happy, absolutely fantastic. Or when you fall in love, and this is when you feel 10 out of 10. So
Mhm.
in real life, I don't think it's even achievable to live higher than like 7.5. That it's really hard to live a couple of months in a row and be happy more than 7.5, because our nervous system is just going to get overwhelmed, and when we feel very happy few days in a row, we just feel burned out. So it's also an art of balance. You have to balance you like when you get some exciting moments in your life. Let's say you do the bungee jump, you may feel lots of adrenaline and maybe happiness if it makes you happy, but try doing some other extreme sport the next day, and then the other extreme sport the next day. You will burn out really quickly. So the idea is that you have to balance your experience as well.
I guess we need more metrics here because if we talk about happiness, it almost seems like now we're talking about a rush of dopamine or adrenaline. Whereas I guess, for example, actually, I talked to a friend of mine recently and he was talking about the difference between him and his girlfriend. He said, my girlfriend or wife chases happiness, whereas I chase peace of mind. So I guess there's a couple of like a certain level of serenity, peace of mind, happiness, certain level of just overall satisfaction. Uh, maybe not satisfaction is like you're just content with your situation, because I feel like you don't want to be just chasing moments of happiness in your life, right? That's also what you're saying. You cannot try to chase moments of happiness 10 out of 10. I think I heard Dan Bilzerian actually talk about this, that you can just destroy yourself completely. He says, I can no longer get satisfaction out of driving a nice car or eating in a nice restaurant because I have the best chefs in the world every day cook for me. So food is no longer able to satisfy me. I eat a 10 out of 10 every day. It doesn't anymore feel like a 10 out of 10. It can only go backwards. Same with cars. Probably it's the same for him with women. He has too many women. So at some point it's like, listen, it can only go downhill from there. So I think he talked about the concept of being very careful with like what type of enjoyments you try to experience, because it could set a new baseline for your happiness. And once you've done that, for example, people that say, oh, I flew business class once and now every day when I'm in economy I feel miserable because I've had the experience of business class. Have you ever thought about this concept? I'm sure you have.
Yeah, sure. That's pretty much the hedonic treadmill idea. Like the more enjoyment you get, the higher the level of your excitement is, the more you need in the future to feel the same dope rush or the rush of dopamine,
Do you
whatever.
do you actively try to calibrate like your moments of, let's say, high dopamine?
Um,
So when you're in the bar again, you see another two hot Ukrainian women, you're like, oh, I already had two hot Ukrainian women yesterday. Let's back off today, you know?
Not really. I would not say that I calibrate it manually, because the life I live right now, like from your example with your friend and his
Mhm.
girlfriend, I think they actually talked about the same concept, but she was like, in her words, chasing the happiness maybe was meant to be chasing the excitement. And I mean, his definition of happiness is something I'm aligned with. Like, I would agree that this is the state of peace of your mind when you feel content, when everything is nice, when everything is
Yeah.
great. I think the one of the greatest words to describe happiness is love. When you feel love, when you love, let's say, your girlfriend, wife, whatever, parents, child, that is when you feel happy. That is when you feel 10 out of 10 on
Yeah,
the peaks of your love.
I would say also like love yourself and love your day-to-day routine. Like if you can just enjoy the little things, like, oh, I go for a nice morning walk with my dog, sit down, have a nice little coffee, enjoy the sunshine on my skin. So it can be something as easy as that. Where I think it's a definitely a trap to just keep on chasing, like that, like you said about the treadmill, like the dopamine chasing. I think that's not really the way forward, because like you said, you cannot live a 10 out of 10, and if that's your expectation, then yeah, you probably feel quite unsatisfied.
Exactly. The art of happiness is to live everyday life happily when you don't have any super events that make your brain explode, that they don't happen to you. Just enjoy these simple things and you actually feel it. And one of the life hacks how to actually do that is to, have some kind of gratitude diary when you asked me about the routine before, so this is one of the answers, by the way. When you wake up in the morning, the first thing I try to do is to think about one person who I am grateful for in my life and what I'm exactly grateful for. And then three things I'm grateful for as well. One could be the one that I feel in the moment. For example, I'm super grateful because I have this bottle. I can drink water. It feels so great. And I try to feel it. And then I think about, okay, I have my health, I have my wife, I have my parents. I'm super happy. And it makes your day much better. It makes you actually feel very happy and content. If you stop noticing those things, if you get on a hedonic treadmill, you just get used to it and you feel unsatisfied.
There's a great quote which says, "You, what you focus on is what you feel." So basically, if you focus on the things that you're grateful for, you will feel quite grateful. Whereas if you focus on shit, what's missing in my life every day, and you try to run behind it, and then when you have it, you think about the next thing. Yeah, then it's basically a lifelong of chasing without satisfaction. Uh, Many of the things that you talked about, I've experimented with as well, and to some degree, I've implemented. But then I usually struggled with, oh, I do it for like a month or 2 months, and what I especially noticed was I was chasing a lot of personal development for the sake of being a high performer in poker. And what I struggled with myself, and I'm curious if you've experienced this or if not, how you fixed it. When I stopped uh, playing high stakes poker, when there was the necessity to actually show up as the best version of myself, I noticed that I lacked a lot of discipline, or a lot of the habits that I had that kind of fell away, because I would like, what's the point? I don't have to play today anyway. Did you experience something like that? And if so, if not, what would be your advice to me?
I think everybody experiences such moments in his career, like everyone. And um, I think it's important to find to find the reasons why, as the Adam said, like to find new reasons why. For example, when I wasn't very motivated by poker, I remember that active coaching is what made me love this game more. Like when my love, let's say, was fading to poker and it wasn't as fun, I realized that looking at this game through the eyes of your students, plus answering their questions, it make you think about the game from the different angle. It makes you study more yourself, and um, you get this feel that you're not playing a zero-sum game actually, because what I don't like about poker the most is that it is a zero-sum game, like defeat or get defeated. I love to compare poker with MMA or gladiator fights. Every day you get into this arena and you fight and you're beaten or you beat someone. That's not the best mindset if you want to live a happy life. And when you coach, you pretty much, that's a win-win situation. Or when you work with your teammates, before coaching, what I was getting a lot of satisfaction for, maybe even more than from the game itself, is with working uh is from working with my friends, my poker friends. I would spend like a lot of many hours with them, not talking just about poker but about some other things. And this team play element, it also added a lot of satisfaction, a lot of joy from the game.
I think necessity is also a very important point there. I remember actually a student of mine pointed out, it was quite a big realization for me. He said, well, it sounds quite easy. I remember we were giving live classes at the time. So there was an actual classroom. There were like eight guys. Everyone was Dutch. And we were talking a bit about these topics, about discipline. And then I mentioned like the same thing that I just mentioned, that I felt like I was slacking. And then the student said, well, it's quite simple, right? You find being able to perform in poker more important than to be able to perform in life. I was like, oh, that's a pretty big that's a pretty big statement. I reflect on it. I was like, actually, that's probably true. I felt like the poker performance, or having to perform, was more driven by a more negative type of emotion. Like I had a certain anxiety or something that I wanted to get rid of through self-development. And then in life, I didn't experience that anxiety, so there was less of a necessity, right? It's easy. I was just content with my life, and I wasn't necessarily striving for my life to be I wasn't striving for my life to be number one, just like I was striving in poker to become number one. So the necessity was naturally lower. I'll be like, in the morning. Like, why would I jump into a cold shower if I'm not having to perform at my absolute best in an hour from now? Let's skip the cold shower. Like, obviously there are certain things like I would continue to work out, I would continue to eat healthy, because they were more like deeper actual values. But the other things were more like performance hacks in order to make sure that I would perform, which I think in hindsight was more driven by like removing certain negative emotions like anxiety or fear of loss, stuff among those lines. You also mentioned that what you really liked about personal development is that you were able to take certain concepts and apply them into your life. Now, I think you mentioned as well, you read like sports psychology books, uh, try to understand like mindsets of certain athletes and try to apply them to poker. How has that switch been for you? And how do you now try to apply self-development into your life compared to when you were doing it in poker? I guess the type of books that you're reading now also changed. Maybe it was more around being the best performer, and nowadays, like you said, more about happiness.
Yeah, in the days of active poker, those were the books about the best performance, as you rightly noted. I think one of the, let's say, paragon books is called Tools of Titans by Tim Ferriss. I think it's quite simple, and poker players could learn many different ideas from there. It's just a book made of many short interviews with different top performers who just share their routines, their life approach, etc. So you can learn a lot from the best performance. I remember getting a lot of cool ideas from there. And well, right now I would say that sure, my interests have changed more. Maybe I got more interested in like politics, history, more interested about how does this world function. If we try to zoom out from our life and see how like the whole planet functions, how did people live many thousand years ago? What made their life better or worse than ours? What can we learn from our ancestors? So evolution, history, philosophy, psychology. Yeah, these areas that I was interested in but had no time or chance to study as I was an active player.
When looking through your poker career, you moved up from 5NL to all the way to 40k NL, so you literally played every stake available. When rising through the ranks, which jump in stakes did you find the hardest?
And L100.
NL 100, you mentioned that, right? 9 months of struggle. After that, there was no more like struggle point where you were like, oh wow, this was a really tough jump.
Oh no, there were so many struggle moments after that one. Like the biggest downswing in my career, I think 2014, when I've lost maybe 30% of my bankroll, something like that, playing an up to an L2K or 1K. So that was really hard. I couldn't just. So I'll give some history here. In 2012, the end of 2012 or 2013, I think it was 2013 to be precise. I went to Goa to spend 2 months there. And guys, it's not the best place to go when you're young in your 20s and playing poker seriously because it gets you way over relaxed. And yeah, you have a lot of things that seduce you. So after that trip, I remember losing my game, and it took me like a year maybe to get back in track. I just couldn't play as good as I used to. And no matter what I tried, it just wouldn't work. And I've tried so many strategies. Some of them were just preposterous, just extremely stupid. Like there was some idea from Matthew John, the book. I'm not sure if it was him or somebody else. The GTO means that on a flop you have like 30% C bet, and then turn and river have 70% C bet because you have like bluff to value ratio. And I've tried playing that strategy for a long time. I would just analyze boards in Flopzilla trying to see bet 30%. I mean, how just silly it is. But I had to try many things until I've arrived to what was working for me.
Throughout your career, I think you reached out to many coaches to help you. One of them actually that I want to touch on. I think you mentioned that you work with a memory coach. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah,
Maybe
mnemonics.
okay. Maybe you could elaborate on that one. And has there been any other coaches or guys that you work with very closely that have had a big impact on your career?
Precisely on the poker career.
No, you can interpret the question however you want. Maybe you can do poker and life. Maybe who sends out in poker and who sends out in life, or psychology,
Mm.
or psychologist?
Okay, so regarding mnemonics, yeah, I found a person, the coach, Ukrainian coach. He's really great, and we work together. I don't remember how many hours, maybe up to 20 hours of individual one-on-one classes, and I've learned a lot. Unfortunately, 90% of that knowledge is not applicable to poker. That's like the biggest thumbs down. But the cool thing is that the 10% that I've gotten, it was fairly enough to boost me up because basically mnemonics teaches your brain to remember the plain information. Like you can remember a lot of useless data. I think the last exercise that we've done by the end of our classes, um, I had to remember a 200-digit number within 20 minutes and then to just like replicate it. And it sounds very cool, but in reality, it's just a useless skill. Like, yes, you can do that. No, it's not that hard. 20 hours of training, you can learn that. But the problem is it's absolutely not practical. But the cool thing is while you are doing that, you're still training your brain, you're still going through the drills, your memory still improves. And what I've learned, the skill of the visualization, it was one of the biggest takeaways from the mnemonics because you memorize stuff by like turning numbers into pictures and those pictures into the stories. And then you kind of tell the story and then you can put the numbers back. And this way, I've tried to approach poker, trying to see the ranges, not like to think about, okay, we have 6 combos of aces, 3 combos of kings, because half of them were 3-bet, whatever. I try to actually visualize, like imagine a picture from Flipzilla when you see this,
The Matrix,
range.
yeah.
I try to see ranges like that. Well, bluntly speaking, on a wall, and it worked to me. It helped me to understand game better, to feel the ranges better, if you can say so.
I can relate with that. For example, if I would always say like if I would explain like a c bet, no, yeah, but you know, and then would make like this square and would say, yeah, but on these type of textures we c bet this part, or here the c betting range is more like top bottom. That's how kind of, and but I couldn't, like I wouldn't really be able to say, oh yeah, 9-10 off 50% of the time. So yeah, it's somewhere in the mid region, so probably sometimes there's a little bit of pink there, a little bit of pink there, a lot of green here. That's kind of how I memorized overall c betting strategies. So I think I didn't do active coaching on that, but I guess I'm a natural picture type of learner. I notice the same, for example, when I do a psychologist session. I picture a lot of things. I turn everything into pictures. I'm a very visual learner. Have you now started to apply that, or did that type of learning already resonate with you?
I've started to apply it. Maybe I was just like you, seeing stuff, concepts and ideas in the form of pictures, but I was definitely not seeing poker in the term of pictures. If somebody would tell me like, wake me up during the night and say, okay, draw your three-betting range, small blind versus the button, but not just the list of combos, like draw this picture. And I tried doing that, and I actually drawn quite a few pictures. It's not that easy as it sounds, actually, if you want to draw it like precisely in Flipzilla. And it also kind of trains your brain to work with the information that way through the visualization.
I heard you talk a lot about studying, even to a point where you said you were studying, what was it, like 5 hours a day, only playing one day a week. You've tried many different strategies as well, trying to get out of the 100 NL trap. What, in your experience throughout your career and also throughout your experience coaching, what has been the most effective way for you to work on your game or to build strategies or to study?
Well, that's the algorithm that I've arrived to by the end of my career, or even the year after, actually, to be more precise, because once I've quit poker as a player, I've started coaching more than I did before. Because before I would just get like 3 to 5 people and then work with them 1.5 years. So I've started working more, and I've started improving my algorithm and like making it better. So I think the best thing to which I arrived was 1 year after quitting poker. And yeah, that's the idea, how you approach to spots. That different spots happen with different frequencies. different boards happen with different frequencies. Some are more important, some are less. It's not about the frequency only. It is also about the possibility to exploit, to build exploits on some boards. It is also about a complexity factor. I call it the factor that people tend to make more mistakes in some spots and less in other spots. So you should like kind of identify those and double down on your double up or whatever, increase your effort. And then there are also spots that people intuitively play far from the solver. And those spots are very interesting to study as well, because there you can make some assumptions like, okay, if most of people deviate that much, then I can exploit that and get a lot of extra EV compared to if I just play the GTO strategy. So many ideas that you can derive and then put it into a picture.
For our audience, like who are probably arise many questions when you just quickly explained like your study algorithm, I wanted to pick out one thing. What are like some characteristics of spots where I think you mentioned it's easy for people to make mistakes? For the listeners, what is something that they have to look for, and how they can identify a situation where it's likely that your opponent or the population in general is likely to screw up by a lot?
Well, there are a couple of ways to find such spots. What's better to begin with? So the lines that people are playing that people play the best are the most common lines. Let's say c-bet, big blind versus the button, or defense against c-bet. It's hard to make a mistake when you play the strategy for many years. Plus, you can look up the solver and correct yourself. But then there are some spots that you don't get to play a lot. For example, small blind versus big blind, 3-bet pot, when the big blind checks flop, and then small blind has to act. Or even big blind versus the button, single raise spot, when the big blind checks on a flop. If he checks more than the solver does, then on the turn, caller has to protect his calling range, he has to protect his check, he has to split his sizes, and there are many ways to make potential mistakes. So those are some ideas to start with. Also, it's important while searching for such spots to ask yourself, okay, this spot is very hard, people make a lot of mistakes, but how often does it actually happen? Because I remember myself finding some spots that seemed like super cool to exploit. I was feeling like super smart. But then I started playing and I realized that these spots happen once in a month, and then I feel dumb, like, what did I just waste 20 hours building my exploits for if it never happens?
Yeah, so it has to be, I mean, we talked about this in the podcast many times, like frequency of spot. It has to be like a balance between the frequency of the spot and the EV of the exploit. Let's say you find a good river race exploit where, you make quite a lot of money, and that spot, occurs maybe once every session or so. It can maybe be quite interesting to explore that. But like you said, when it only happens once a month, or when something happens frequently, but the EV gain is very slightly, maybe it's not really worth your time. It's very hard to give an exact metric, right? You kind of start to have a feel like, okay, this was actually a waste of time, and this was not a waste of time. And based on that, you're gonna recalibrate your future studying. You mentioned about the characteristics of the spots, right, that lead to players making mistakes. So knowing this knowledge, how would that change your strategic approach, right? You talked a lot about, okay, the most frequent spots and the spots that people are most used to, that's where they make less mistakes. So knowing that, how does that impact the strategy that you would like to employ?
Well, first of all, we've just scratched the surface here because it's a very complex idea, your study approach, how you spend 2 hours of theory that you can devote every day to studying theory compared to the field. It is full of nuances because if you like the spots that you choose to study, um, they make a very big difference in the long run. Because if one person gets let's rate the level of the efficiency of approaching poker study. Let's say one person is 80% efficient and another person is 90% or 95% efficient. In the long run, that is immense. The difference is immense. So your goal is to find as many nuances as you can to improve your study method as much as possible, because in the long run you'll have some incredible edge. when the compound effect gets into the play.
So within your optimized study algorithm, what are some of the tools that you like to use, and how do you think you can use them most effectively?
Well, the main tool is the solver before GTO Wizard, which is now the king. It was the simple pass flop, which was, by the way, not very popular among English-speaking audience. I think most of people used Pio solver, and simple pass flop used to be much better, at least at the beginning, and then Pio has caught up, I think. The option of node blocks, like node lock in the strategies, it was very convenient. You could do that on a go. You didn't have to recalculate the spot from the very beginning. You can just, get to the turn and get your calculation in 1-2 minutes or faster, depends on your PC. So simple pass flop for sure, and then Flipzilla, even though it's like an outdated tool, before the GTO Wizard, Flipzilla had this, well, it now still has this very nice function called hold deck, when you can visualize the equity versus the equity in a graph, one position versus another, and then you can see who has the advantage in what type of equity hands, either the knotted equity hands or strong or medium, etc., which gets you to understand the sizings better and how often to check, etc. So it was super convenient. Now you get all these functions in GTO Wizard.
Shout out to GTO Wizard, sponsor of
Yeah. Thanks for
sponsor of the
killing
pod.
poker, guys.
Thanks. Yeah,
No,
yeah,
I'm just kidding. I love it. It's very fast, very convenient.
yeah, they're especially like older school players. They have mixed feelings around technology developing so quickly. You mentioned also earlier in the pod about the threats, right, of using solvers. I think you talked about mimicking the solvers. What are like the most common leaks you see when players try to build strategies around solvers? We already talked about in your study algorithm, maybe players studying spots that are not that frequent. But what are like common mistakes that they make when trying to? I think you talked about copying the solver. Why is that so bad?
Okay. I think one of the main misconceptions that people have about solver is that they, for some reason, need to play like a solver. But what they don't get is that solver, his strategy is based on the most optimal strategy while playing against the same perfect machine who knows your cards. So if you do something differently, you are going to be instantly punished. So the goal of your strategy is not to like maximize your EV against this opponent who has many leaks, but to be invulnerable yourself, to have no weak spots that can be attacked. So you have to mix many hands into different lines. You have to use randomizer, etc. You have to call down using the frequencies and so on and so forth. When in practice, people just have so many leaks. And if you try to play the solar strategy, I mean, I've tried to shortly explain this idea in my next video that will be released soon. I talk about it, that people don't really ask themselves a very simple question that would explain it. Why there were no successful GTO bots ever who played online? Like, why is that? If GTO is the best game, why can't you just create this bot that plays, GTO Wizard or Pio strategy on every street and just crush everybody? Why such bots have never come to high stakes or mid stakes? All the bots that I've ever played against were exploitative bots. Like, why? Why is that if the GTO is the best strategy? The idea is that GTO, it teaches you a lot about how to realize the equity of hands, how to build your strategy, what sizes to use, who has to check once again, who has to protect his check, why it is needed, why it is not needed. You can learn a lot from it. But if you just try to copy it and to do the same things that Solar does in your real life games, it will not really lead you anywhere. It will make you a better player than you were before, for sure, but it will not make you a great player.
Yeah, people often draw wrong conclusions from the solutions that they see in front of them. They also go in with the wrong mentality, right? They want to know what am I supposed to do? That's already the mentality that they go in with. And then when they see the solution, they think that this is okay, what I can learn from the solution. Well, this is how I'm supposed to play, which is a wrong conclusion to come from, right? We should just look at this as a model that we can then study and we can start to tweak and be like, okay, well, if this is optimal play and nobody reaches exact optimal play, then in which people can deviate, or which people, in which ways is it very likely for people to deviate, and how can we take advantage of that? Those are way more functional questions to ask a solver.
Yep.
Anything you would like to add to that?
No, not really. I think you've covered it well.
When making decisions at the poker table, what for you are the most important things to take in consideration, and what do you think is something players assign way too much or too little importance towards? For example, you mentioned when back battling, you don't want to play too much tables because you want to pay attention to timing of your opponent. That could, for example, be one of these things. Any of the other things that stand out?
Yeah, well, but you also should be careful with the timing tells and not just derive
Not
some
confuse it like
conclusions
getting
based
water. I
on.
remember you said, right?
Yeah, and it's quite easy, you know, to fool yourself. Our brains love to fool themselves. So it's easy, you know, to see some time tell that is not confirmed and then say, okay, this was the reason why I made this silly 3-barrel expensive call down because I thought that blah blah blah. So you have to be very confident about your reads and assign them a value from 1 to 10. For example, never view any single factor as like 10 out of 10 read that leads to your decision. Usually it's like, okay, I have this timing tell. It could be right, it could be wrong. Let's say the accuracy is 6 out of 10 or 7 out of 10. And then I have this read that, I know, the sizing read, let's say. The accuracy is like 5 out of 10. Maybe right, maybe wrong, not sure. And then you kind of try to see what decision would be the best. Like, you never know for sure. Poker is the game when you don't see the cards of your opponents. Well, it's obvious. So your goal is to make as less mistakes than you've done yesterday. So you'll never be super precise, but you can be 1% more correct, and that is a very good thing on the long run.
What I like about your answer, and I think what a lot of players can learn from, is you didn't say anything about, if you think about what the solver takes in consideration when making a decision, it's going to have a lot of factors that, as you think already kind of pointed out, does not really apply, right? Because the solver knows the strategy. The solver will get punished if you adjust your strategy. You talked way more about the art of figuring out what the fuck your opponent has so you can figure out what the fuck you should do, right? Which are, in my opinion, the most important question, and is a sort of an art that people have forgotten because people just focus on, yeah, I have to play my range, I have to play this strategy, I have to. Whereas you're more like, what does he have, and what based on that information, what can I do with my hand? Right? That sums it up a little bit better.
Well, I have to correct myself here if this is what the way you've interpreted my words, because I like to give this analogy of poker skill or poker being like a house, and GTO understanding of how does one range interact with another range, who has the advantage, not advantage, what is the SPR, when do we need to protect our checking edge? All these things that you leave from the solver, this is the ground, you know, the basement, the ground base on top of which you build your house. This is GTO. Yes. Like, you must know it. Without understanding this, like if you play this game trying to get into opponent's head and without understanding the fundamentals, it will not lead to anything good. So you must have a deep understanding of the GTO. But what I'm saying is that just having a deep understanding of GTO equals being a theoretician without a practical, knowledge and skill, without actually going through this plays. And it will not make you a good player because you need to apply exploits, you need to build walls, you need to build a roof, you need to put the solar roof to make the best exploit and go green energy and exploit your opponents. If you just have your, super solid base of your house, it's good. You will not get blown by the wind, but it will not make you a good player as well.
Yeah, how I like to explain it, just like there's like forces of nature that we have to oblige with, right? There's gravity. It's a law of nature that we have to oblige with. It's the same in poker. There's certain laws of theory that we have to understand, and we have to play within the laws of theory here and there, right? For example, the forces of equity. There's just certain setups where the equity advantage to one player is just huge, and if you don't respect it, you're just burning money. I don't care which read you have. I don't care what kind of reason you invent to do something different. You're just spewing money away. But the problem is that the equities or the equity advantages, disadvantages, they are really dependent on the range that we face. And the range that we face is really dependent on how they constructed their range. Where people often go wrong is they think, well, the solver does that, and therefore I do that, but they didn't take in consideration that what's the actual range that I'm facing, because the actual range that you're facing determines the equities, which is going to determine what you should be doing, right? And if you spend no time in trying to figure out that based on timing, based on bet sizing, etc., based on information that your opponent gives you, what your equity actually is, you learned all these things, but you missed the most important skill, or at least after we agree after the fundament has been laid, is to actually try to figure out what your opponent has so you can estimate what the equity is, so you can actually come up with the actual proper correct decisions in this moment, not taking in any future considerations that, oh, he's now seen you do this, so solver will flip 100% to a different strategy that will explode your strategy, which doesn't really happen in practice.
Yeah, and another important aspect that the higher you play, the more creative and smart your opponents are going to be. And let's like if we take some theoretician who has played, 1,000 hours against GTO trainer, and he comes to play Reg War on an L2K, and let's say he plays against Born to Tilt. I remember him using the strategy like pot bet c bet and check, when he would just pot bet c bet, like play super non-standard strategy and then just know what to do against different opponents. Or there was another very old school guy, I think his username was Redivchik, a guy from Russia. He
Yeah, I
played with
remember him.
like
Yeah.
30% c bet.
Yeah,
Remember, he used to.
he had like a 0% CBET out of position, right? In all spots. Was it him?
Well, it was very low, but his overall CBET was 30, so
Yeah,
probably
yeah, yeah.
maybe like less than 10%. And he was a very successful player. He was making good money. I remember having very nice win rates. So how would you like play if you trained your brain to memorize these solar patterns, to know like turn ranges, river ranges? And when we train against the GTO solver, we subconsciously memorize the plays. Like when we make the mistake and we see that it was a mistake, our brain, it makes this note like, okay, here I should do that. But then you start playing against people and your intuition tells you like, here you have to call. This is plus 1.23 BB per 100 call. And you call and the bluff is never there. And you feel like, okay, this is the variance. I should go back to theory.
Another player that stands out to me, Eccentric BG. Remember him?
Yeah, he used to limp a lot.
Just he was like the only guy, or at least at high stakes, he would just limp, except I think besides the button, he would just only limp. Which, we could have a whole argument about suboptimal, yes, no. But he was doing something that was different than the rest. So it was only Eccentric who was doing it. And he wasn't at my table all the time. So when he was at the table, like the frequency that I would face him wasn't high enough for me to really put in all the hours to figure out, okay, how do I beat Eccentric? So most probably he has thought about the strategy a lot. So in every spot, he would limp and I would, for example, check my blind. Most probably he had a way better idea of what was going on than me. So I would always be trailing. So that's kind of the advantages of playing a strategy that could be suboptimal, but could be more optimal in practice due to lack of experience and lack of understanding how that spot is actually supposed to be played by your opposition, because it's kind of also in line with what you said, right? Yeah, this is a spot that people have played less, and the less you've played a spot, the less you face the spot, the more likely it is that you will make a mistake. So have you, throughout your career, deviated from theory or used strategies that were quote not a thing just to put people out of their comfort zone? And does one maybe stand out to you that you were like, oh, I was always doing that? For example, for a long time, I would always just 3-bet the razor. So let's say, for example, a guy opens 2.5, I would just make it 5 big blinds. So he would be playing a very wide range out position in a 3-bet pot. I know exactly what the range is, how he's like to screw up. So while that was suboptimal, and I think actually it is suboptimal because getting a fold, makes you quite a lot of money. And obviously when I make it 2.5 to 5, I get no fold. But post flop, I would outplay him quite a lot because he would be in a situation that he didn't know what to do, and I would be in a situation where I was very confident and knew what was going to happen. Do you have anything like that stands out?
Yeah, actually, I want to say two things about it. First is why like eccentric BG strategy is good. It's cool. You make some extra EV, but why the strategies are not enough, like to become really one of the best. The problem is when you learn this exact strategy, your time is always limited, so you don't have time to learn the standard spots, and then you get owned by Linus, let's say, who knows how to deviate everywhere playing the standard lines, raise and 3-bet pots. So when he gets to play against these players, he kind of lacks the experience himself. Like he can get some EV from the limping pots, but then he would lose it back in those spots that he did not study himself because the time is limited. So that's the one thing. Yeah, and yeah, I've tried many different, unconventional strategies throughout my career, limping from the early positions with fish behind, uh, works pretty good. Fish, like when you are on EP or MP and fish is button or earlier, so you get a lot of squeezes when you raise, and then you can create a mixed range of limp and 3-bet and raise. So yeah, I've experimented with that pretty successfully, I think. And then trying to 3-bet 14 big blinds from big blind against button and cutoff back in 2018, like before the solvers came out with this idea. Because we've calculated it on preflop servers and tried to implement the strategy, but once again, we did not stick to it for some reason, for a couple of reasons.
Yeah, I'm a big limping fan, so I definitely can acknowledge great strategy. What has been the most unconventional strategy that you've applied, and what did you learn? Maybe it was successful or unsuccessful. What, like, the most unconventional thing that you can think of?
Well, that's a hard question. Something very unconventional. Probably, well, I don't even know. I think limping on the early positions was quite unconventional. Maybe limping on a button in Reg Wars on anti-tables. I think, well, I've done some calculations, made some ranges and tried doing that. I think it worked well, but, the distance that I've had to play was very short, so it's hard to tell.
Yeah, I remember I tried a little bit of button limping. It was funny. It was me and my main study partner back in the day. I'm sure you know Scarface.vot. I'm sure you played a lot with him, right? We were
Yeah.
like best buddies. Did all our poker strategy together, and we would both try to implement limping in Rack Wars on the button, but we did it for a different reason. I thought it was just cool, something different people play. But he said, "No, man, it's great because I limp the button and people don't want to play, and they just give me the table. Great." Because then they said, and then they say, "Yeah, okay, I'm not gonna play you 3-handed, 4-handed if you start limping the button." So he obviously is like, "Okay, well then I limp the button because I don't want to necessarily play. I just want to get the lobby." Whereas I was like, "No, okay, if they ask me, then it means the game is not gonna run, so I would stop limping the button." So we had a completely different mindset towards it. He would always see it left from the bigger picture, like, yeah, I don't want to bet. I just want to get this lobby. I'm gonna play a 10-hour session. I don't want to waste my time on this. Whereas I was way more like strategically curious and like, no, I'm gonna limp the button, and then this can happen, that can happen. And then when they would say, I don't want you to limp the button, I was like, quit. I would stop limping the button because I wanted to play. So it was interesting, like a completely different, different holistic approach. Hi guys, Rene aka the Wacko here with a quick Mechanics of Poker 2.0 announcement. In our program you will get access to 80 plus hours of content in which we will explain you all aspects needed in order to become a more successful poker player. Now one of these of course is the technical aspect of the game, in which I'll be explaining you all the mechanics behind poker strategies. We'll be talking about GTO, exploitative play with an extra focus on the why behind certain strategies and why the population has certain leaks. And to increase your win rate even further, we've recently added a river bluff and bluff catching section so you can increase your EV when those pots become very big. Our mindset and performance coach Adam Carmichael, he took care of the mental game and performance section of this program, in which he will teach you everything you need to know in order to break through limiting beliefs, better handle your emotions, break free from tilt, and play your A game more consistently. And last but not least, we've added the management and optimization section in the program, in which we will give you various tips and tricks to make it more likely for your poker career to succeed, and how to continuously improve as a poker player. Now on top of that, this concept is continuously evolving based on feedback and suggestions we get from our community. Next to all this content, you will have access to our exclusive Discord community, monthly live Q&A calls, and one-on-one coaching session in which we are going to be reviewing if you have been implementing the stuff that we teach you in the mechanics of poker correctly. So do you think you have what it takes to master the mechanics of poker? Go over to mechanicsofpoker.com and maybe you will get a chance to work with me and Adam and make more progress in your poker career. But for now, without further ado, let's get back into more goodness in today's episode. You've done a lot of coaching, and I think we already touched on a couple of things. But what are maybe next to the study algorithm? What are like the 3 most important lessons or concepts that you explain your students?
From this, like judging by the students' feedback, I think the psychological aspect was very important. Like, yeah, many people say that some things about the psychology, about the approach, off tables approach, was even, well, not less beneficial than the technical approach. Then the algorithm, how to study, how to get the most out of every minute you spend on the game. And then just, getting the solid technical base, because given the foundation and deep understanding of GTO and then how to build exploits and psychology. So these are 3 main cornerstones, I'd say.
You mentioned a lot about psychology. You also mentioned a little bit before in our conversation about the brain. I know you studied a lot about the brain. So how does the brain screw up in poker?
Well, small remark, I would not say that I like studied a lot. I think my level is better than like fish, but it's not higher than an L100 or even an L50 regular. Just know the main ideas, main concepts, like the dopamine and serotonin system, and how we should try balance between them, and how we should try the optimal time to play and when not to play. So the way, answering your question, the way our brain messes up is through the so-called cognitive biases. And this is like the whole area to study, which is, well, we can call it critical thinking. Going back to, the book Thinking Fast and Slow by Kahneman, which is very, I think, popular among poker players. Or I'd even mention my all-time favorite lectures on critical thinking by Steven Novella. Basically, these 2 authors explain how our brains fool themselves, what type of biases exist. And there are so many biases that were formed through the evolution that helped us to survive in the past, but that do not really help us at the tables. Like when we get this feel of fight or flight, hit, like fight or run in a 3-bet pot on a river, playing deep stacked, because our reptile brain tells us that losing money equals higher chances to die, equals do not do that, avoid that, run, feel a rush of adrenaline, and it's not good for poker. We would prefer to play like robots. So this is one of the ideas. And then the confirmation bias is actually one of my favorite ones. The idea of it is that our brain, it has some belief, and it subconsciously always notices this belief, but always subconsciously ignores factors that contradict this belief. And this is what makes people mess up when they work with statistics a lot, when they use the data mining. Like they can find some idea and then just start believing in it. And then when they play, their brain actually does not notice this thing, but it notices everything that confirms their beliefs. So they kind of lie to themselves and feel that they are right.
So
I think in this book, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think in these lectures by Steven Novella, the example with confirmation bias was like, imagine a couple, guy and a girl, and they live together. And then the guy says that, look, I always put the toilet seat up. And the girl says, no, you never put it up. Like, I have to always remind you. And they both believe that they are right and their partner is wrong. Like that they always do it, but partner never does that. But in reality, it's not true. Obviously, they both do it with some percentage of time.
I've tried to explain this concept of confirmation bias to my wife a couple of times for this exact reason. Like, yeah, but you highlight the times. I remember pointing it out once to, I think it was Poker Kluka, a guy I've done a lot of work with as well. We were sharing an office, and he would say, would go grab a coffee. And he said, "Oh man, the water in the coffee is always finished." I'm like, dude, I can't believe. Do I have to explain how this works? No, right? And like every time when the water is finished, that's when you notice. You don't notice when the water is not finished. And especially, I think in relationships, it's very important because we often just don't notice the thing. We take things for granted, and then we only notice when something is lacking, and then it feels like it's always lacking, or you never do this, you never do that. So it's even bigger than just poker. To come back to poker, though, you mentioned two big biases. How do we fix it?
I'd like to add one more, if I
Sure.
may. The sunk cost bias. When we
Mhm.
invest money in a pot, and then the more money we invested, the harder it is to get away from this pot. I think it's also one of the major leagues, and yeah, it's the most popular league for people who shoot up the stakes, who go higher, and when they start playing, it's really hard for them to make faults. I think I've discussed this notion with many high stakes players. Like, I would ask my friends, in your experience, when you see a guy from lower stakes shooting higher stake, what do you think he is likely to be wrong about? Is he going to overcall, or is he going to overfold? Like, if you take some average guy without any information, is he going to overbluff, or is he going to underbluff? So, guys, what do you think about it? I'd like to ask you the same question.
You asking me or are you asking the audience?
I mean, you and Adam, and the
I
audience
mean,
can answer in the comments for sure.
so I feel like it's more likely is going to underfold, and I feel it's more likely is going to underbluff. Those would be my answers. Adam, jump in.
Yeah, I say he's most likely to underbluff. And I think he'd probably overfold. I'd go for overfold just for risk aversion, and the kind of cost of making errors often plays into it. So what's the answer, Sergi? We're dying to know.
Yeah, so it's quite a counterintuitive thing. I think it's like 70% of people are going to overbluff and overbluff catch, and then 30% are going to do the opposite.
Oh, so
So we still,
it's always in line. So
well, it's
basically, they
still,
always show the same behavior.
well, we have 70% of people who are going to be way too loose, if I can call it like that, and then
Okay.
30% who are going to be way too tight. So on average, I think we have some, you know, some how to say, some informational edge, that on average people are likely to be a bit more loose than they should, than they are on their own stake, regular stake.
Especially from like the hero calling perspective. I mean, we talked about this on the podcast a lot. They put their opponent on a pedestal, or often they feel like they need to do something special, so they need to find this bluff combo. They assume that, you know, they're playing as Jayser, high stakes legend. You know, I have to call him down. I cannot get overrun. This kind of psychology definitely plays a part. Before I hand it over to Adam, because I'm sure he's like, oh, let me include me in this conversation. I love biases. I wanted to quickly touch on how, in your experience, and how would you go about fixing those? So we talked about the sunk cost fallacy, we talked about confirmation bias, and we talked about risk aversion due to our reptile brain not wanting to lose money. So any tips for the audience, because I'm sure everyone struggles to that to a certain degree.
Yeah, so first tip is what we've spoken in the beginning of this conversation, about writing down the stimulus and the reaction and why was it wrong and how we should fix it, and then doing the reps, doing the repetitions to actually do it again, and stop, and at least decrease the number of mistakes that we make. That's number one. Number two, I would say working with a cognitive behavioral psychologist or reading the literature about it. There is a great book. It's called Feeling Good by Eric Burns. This book has many exercises that you can do by yourself and on daily basis and work with your biases. I think it's great. And then also I would add the critical thinking books and lectures, learning about your biases before fighting with them is also important, because we've named just three and there are like dozens of them.
Yeah, and also fighting with them. So the fight should have happened before you started playing. If you try to fight them when you're in the spot, you're gonna lose 100%. So we talked a lot about stimulus response. I remember, I don't know where I got this from, but we have to create space between the stimulus and response, because within that space we can observe and reflect to see if what is this emotion. So also before we then start playing, I think a very common mistake that players make is they say, oh, I shouldn't be doing this, or I should be doing that. And they go in, I will not call the river today. Something like that. Or I will not get angry when I get sucked out. And that's how they try to go in. And the first time, they really trying to hold on. Maybe it works. Second time, and then before you know it, they're back to old patterns. Like you have to come up with a different response to the situation. So I remember I would always write down like thought replacements or action replacements. I now do X, but that's the trigger. So there's space between, which you can practice, for example, through meditation. So you can observe like, hey, this is the trigger. I'm aware of my triggers. I'm aware of how I now feel. This is my default response. What would be a response that's more in line with achieving my long-term goals, for example? So you can have certain thoughts to certain situations, and you can start to think different. We touched actually on a lot of good points in the podcast we did with Sunny, I believe. He spent a lot of time on this. Adam, Sergii gave his top 3 biases that hinder poker players. Any biases you would like to add, and any tips that you would like to share in your experience how poker players can fight biases at the tables?
Well, what a fascinating topic. And Sergii did a really great job of outlining how biases work, what are some of the most common biases, how to work through them. And yeah, it's a fascinating area to explore. And I like to think of the biases in almost like 2 categories. I've done a lot of work on trying to figure out what biases affect poker players, how they affect them. And you can almost split the biases into 2 categories. One is biases of the ego. This also factors in survival factors, fight or flight stuff. This is often when you're fighting back. Confirmation bias, you want to protect yourself. It's all about a survival protection ego kind of construct of biases. And these are all just basic protection, and they're triggered by that kind of ego dominance. Then there's another whole side of biases, which I would call faulty mental models, which are blind spots. And blind spots are based on the information you've seen, or information you haven't seen. And this is often how the brain calculates information. So for example, if I see a showdown and somebody bluffs me on the river, I go, he's always bluffing me. I see the information, and I use the information I've seen to almost extract that was what happened. Or anchoring bias. Someone uses a big bet size on the flop, and I get anchored to, oh, he must be strong here. So we see a small part of information, and we don't see the blind spot, which is hidden. And the brain's always making shortcuts and trying to fast track information. So we have another set of biases or faulty mental models that occur through blind spots. So I think it's, as Sergii mentioned, you've got to do a little exploration and almost go through all the literature of the biases and which ones apply to you, and then start to unpack them. So the way I like to do it, I like to go, what is the bias? Like, it's really good to understand why the bias occurs, because the mind isn't like doing this like stupidly. It's doing it to protect you from either survival mechanisms, or it's doing it from a blind spot. And once you understand where it's coming from, it gets you to move past it. So for example, if we look at confirmation bias, which is very common, what is it? So this is where we seek opinions and ideas that back up our own thoughts. All right. So if someone gives me information that says, Adam, you've done that right, I go, yes, thank you. If someone goes, Adam, you played that badly, I go, sorry, what was that? Didn't hear you. Gone out the window. So we confirm that. So why do we do that? This is because it protects the ego. It makes us feel smart. It makes us feel clever. We don't feel challenged. We like to be smart and know what to do. So that is kind of the framework of it. But what's the cost of not working on it? The cost is we're narrow-minded. We don't learn new perspectives. We don't learn new opinions. We don't learn new ideas. So then you go, how does that show up at the poker tables? Well, you go, okay, well, if I'm talking hands and strategy just with people who agree with me, I'm going to have a very one-sided perspective. If people give me insights or different perspectives, let's say I play a regular who's got a very good win rate on my player pool, but he does things differently to me, and I go, bad reg. And I go, he's rubbish. I've missed the opportunity to learn from this regular because I'm confirming what I do and not what he does. So then the kind of solution is, how do I take action to correct that bias? And once you spot it, it's often very easy. So for example, confirmation bias is, how do I seek opinions that differ from my own? how do I drop my ego aside and have conversations with people I fundamentally disagree with? And you find a lot of people struggle with this when it comes to politics, when it comes to religions, when it comes with money, when it comes with your poker strategy, if you're very attached to it, and people find it hard to go against it. So you got to find, in the poker context, ideas that differ from yours. So yeah, I think it's a really important conversation of understand the biases that apply to you. I'd say a few to add on that we haven't spoke about. One would be like hindsight bias or outcome bias, where you basically use results to validate whether you're playing well or what your strategy is good. So for example, you do a big bluff on the river, he folds, you go, yes, great bluff, awesome. Or opposite, he calls and you go, idiot, why did I do that? And although you know you're playing a range, you only see one combo and you judge your strategy based on the combo, and then you get annoyed or happy based on that. So trying to work on the results side and not getting too driven to outcomes. But yeah, there's a whole other kind of spectrum in terms of negativity bias is the one where we basically we always focus on the negative. We focus on what went wrong, what went right. We've got a kind of built in nature to steer towards negativity, which helped our species survive. So for example, if I see a lion by the river and I remember that, awesome, danger, 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 don't go there. That's inbuilt to remember that. So the same with our minds, we generally gravitate towards remembering negative outcomes. And again, that can lead to a whole host of negative inner dialogue of self-defeated talk. I would do a lot of my coaching with players who have inner dialogues, which are very defeatist. They make a mistake. They're super critical. They beat themselves up. It leads to a lot of emotions, frustration. But yeah, I could rant on for a long time on these because there's so many, but I think Sergii did a great job in terms of thinking fast and slow is a great in point in terms of mapping out the framework and understand how the brain works, what biases apply to you. I think is a good exercise and a very worthwhile tool for all poker players to go down.
Adam, I have a question for you. When we talk about like he's a talented poker player or talent in poker, can we then directly relate that to he's just in general less sensitive to bias? Would that be a talent?
I would say it's a skill. It's so hard to distinguish between
no,
talent
yeah, obviously,
and skill.
like we can, so we can enhance our with skill. But let's say, for example, when we talk about pure talent, someone just rose up to the ranks, seems more talented. Could it be that a talent is that a person is less sensitive to bias or experiences less bias than other? His brain is just, in a way, less. His brain functions less in the normal society, but functions better in a game of poker.
100%. So I class cognitive biases, I call them faulty mental models because it allows us to realize, oh, there's a model that my mind's using that is a bit faulty that I can change. So I'd say a lot of talented players have more mental models that are more conducive to poker success. They've got a framework of thinking in logic, in strategic ways that is less primal, less ego-driven, less blind spots come up, and they've got basically a better mental model of mental mapping of how to think in spots and particularly analyze and think. I think that's almost certainly the case now. Whether that's a skill they were born with or a talent they were born with, or they've developed that through other games, other skills, other life experiences is very hard to tell. Probably a combination of both, but almost certainly they've got a better mental toolkit and less faulty mental models that impact the decision making. All right, I want to bring it back now to reflecting on your poker career. We've covered so many topics and we've basically extracted so much knowledge from you already, but I want you to go back and just think about some of the most important things you've learned for your poker career. So for you, you mentioned struggling with your mindset throughout your career, and I'm guessing with this, you also had maybe some belief systems that were holding you back. I know for myself, I always created like ceilings that I'm only capable of playing that level, or I'm only capable of making that much money. And it would always hold me back for long periods of time until I realized it was just like a belief system that was holding me back. For you, what's the biggest belief system you've had to overcome in order to progress with your poker career?
There were a few I can remember of. One of them was that I don't have a poker talent. Equals, I will not be able to compete on the highest level. And my understanding of talent is it comes from the practical way, from like talking and working and studying together with people who I deem more talented. Like, or let's say people who are natural in understanding poker on an intuitive level. For example, the two most talented guys who I know in poker. One is Fish2013 and another is Stefan. So Fish, he could understand poker on, oh, and Truteller, of course, but I don't know him personally, but he is obviously a poker genius. So for Fish 2013, before any solver appeared, he could dissect the game into pieces and understand it on a very deep fundamental level. So he had a very big edge before any of the software came out, just from, you know, having a knack to understanding games with how to say it, not full information like poker, and math, and being very smart person overall. And then there is Stefan, for example, who came to poker in the era of solvers. What makes him talented is the speed that it takes him to learn. For example, I remember that we would take a coaching session from our friend from another discipline, not Six Max Cash, but who is a very strong theoretician. And then he would explain some idea, and Stefan would like get it instantly. And to me, it would take like 3x more time to get it. Or we would discuss some concepts. It's just the speed with which person processes the information and some individual things that make him stand out. Another example comes to my mind is for Haley. He has some incredible memory, like incredible memory. He would remember hands, you know, suits played many years ago. Um, yeah, and this is something I never had. So talking to these people, I would think that, okay, I probably don't have what it takes to be one of the best. So that's one of the things. And what I've ignored here, that there could be some other things that I'm not aware of that I have that could help me to get the edge in something else. Maybe I feel my opponents better. Maybe my discipline allows me to get some extra edge from studying more efficiently. Maybe, you know, maybe there is something else I don't even know what it was, but it helped me. That's number one. Number two, I think the memory. I would always think that, well, my memory is not great, so this is probably something that will not help me become one of the best. Number three would be the notion that in order to be the best, you need to work 10 hours a day, have no life, and just say bye-bye to your friends and family. So sounds like an excuse that my brain has created, constructed. And yeah, these are the three I can think of right now.
So good. And yeah, I think as you were speaking there, it's so interesting to relay how it's just like a story narrative. So for you, you mentioned like, I don't have a poker talent. My memory is not great. To be the best is like a lot of hard work. These are like just like kind of stories we can like fix it, say to. And when we have that in our minds, we often seek evidence, or we see evidence in our environment that confirms it. As we mentioned before, confirmation bias. So you look at like the best players in the world and go, don't have a memory like that guy, haven't got the poker talent that Stefan's got, haven't got the work ethic of the highest volume guy in my game, and we can use that to reconfirm a limited belief system. But as you mentioned, what you're missing is, what are your hidden talents? Like, no player's the complete package. Maybe someone is, but maybe a Linus or somebody. But most players have strengths and weaknesses. All of us do in some capacity. So then you've got to go, what makes me uniquely talented to pursue poker at a high level? So for you, when you were going past these belief systems, so I'm guessing to some degree they were still in the back of your mind as you were moving up the stakes, what were the beliefs you had to reinforce in yourself to get past them? If you didn't think you were talented or had a good memory, I know you worked on fixing those, how did you install a better belief system to allow you to move forward?
Well, first of all, was to recognize these beliefs and then to cancel them out. Basically, in the first video that I made on my YouTube channel, I've described this exercise when you write them down and then you cross them out with a pencil and write why it is not true. And this is the idea I've gotten from some seminars on like self-development, whatever. And I think, once again, it's like a compound effect. You read some books, you talk to people, you try different stuff, something works, something doesn't. And at some point you understand, not just logically, but on both logical and emotional levels, that your beliefs are actually false. And this is the story you're telling yourself. So you just cross it out from your mind and just keep working, just trying other methods. And then you see the results, like, okay, it works. Now I see a bit edge, at least against some people. I never seen the edge before, and now it works. And what could I do better? And then you get this gamble, you know, you get like excited and you are excited about growing, about getting better inch by inch.
Yeah, and I think it's like beliefs can create a barrier, like a wall or a ceiling that stops you moving forwards. And as you mentioned, like the process of identifying them, crossing them out, and replacing them with a new one is one of the most powerful things you can do for your life, because we all hold on to certain beliefs based on our childhood, our upbringing, our past experiences that in some capacity limit our growth for the next chapter, the next stage we're trying to grow into. And if we don't examine them, we often just hit a wall and we're like, I can't move forward. But really it's like, oh, this is the belief system that's there, that's creating a barrier. How do I move past that? And it can be as simple as, yeah, decide on what you want to believe. And I think as Rene mentioned as well, like what we focus on is what we feel. We've talked about gratitude in this conversation as well. And the same applies for belief systems. When you fixate on what you want to believe and you start to look for evidence to support that, you start to see it. So for example, I've heard players say things like, oh, I'm not smart enough to move up stakes. Let's say they're playing 500 NL and they want to move to 1Ks. And they say, I'm not talented enough, I'm not smart enough to move up stakes. But they've already moved up stakes 8 times in their career. They've started $10, the 20s, the 50s, the 100s, and they've got a proven track record with themselves that they can learn a new strategy, beat the level above, and keep learning and growing and iterating their strategy. Yet they get to a point where they go, it's too hard now, I can't do that. And they start fixating on, this guy's really good, he's too talented. But in reality, if they fixated on, I've learned how to beat levels before, no matter how hard it gets, I can learn it again. It's the same process. And doubling down on that, I think is, yeah, so valuable. But yeah, I think coming to terms with your beliefs is super important. In terms of things that stopped you moving forward. So you mentioned, we've already touched on a little bit, but this kind of block when you got stuck at the hundreds for 9 months, was there any belief systems there that held you back in terms of looking back that stopped you progressing? Or was it just like strategy that was lacking at the time?
I can't really recall because it was what 12 years ago, but definitely technical, some not understanding some technical stuff, and psychology had a big role for sure. So maybe 50-50. Don't really remember.
What do you wish you had known about poker starting out on day one? When you, let's say when you go pro after you've finished your studies from university, what would you wish you had known if you could impart some wisdom onto your younger self on that day?
Well, I would increase the time invested in psychology for sure, like tenfold, because it was the percentage of the time was like super slow to non-existent when I was starting out first years. I was just not respecting it enough, and it was one of the biggest mistakes. What else? I'm not sure, because all the technical stuff, all the understanding in the pre-solar era came from trying and trial and error way. So any mistakes that I've made, they were a bricks in the wall to, let's say, mastery of the game at some point. So cannot really call them mistakes, except for the 30% c-bet strategy that was just dumb. But it
So
was
the
fun.
version of you today, I'm guessing, has learned a lot of lessons from your poker career. Which lesson are you most proud of or pleased with that you've learned throughout your poker career?
Well, I think understanding this notion that you should learn to get pleasure from the pain, from losing, like you should actually get pleasure or at least zero EV on emotional level. You should not feel negative. Your losses should motivate you and push you forward. And the more you get beaten down, the more often you should rise up and become even stronger. And the only one way to succeed in any endeavor that involves human competition or mastery is through trial and error and through mistakes. That mistakes are not bad. Mistakes are inevitable. And mistake is an inevitable part of your progression. That's it.
So how do you begin to derive pleasure from pain? Let's say someone listening to this suffers a lot when they have a bad beat or they have a losing poker session and they struggle to see any value from the pain they're experiencing. How do you start to be constructive and learn to derive some pleasure, or at least even neutral, from painful scenarios?
Well, in order to do that, you need to restructure your understanding of success, and you need to see the success through the lens of getting better 1% at a time, not like from going from 0 to 100, or to 70, but just getting 1% better than your version one day prior. So each time you make a mistake, once you have analyzed, you've marked your hands, you went through them, you analyzed them, you learn something. And it means that you've actually become better today than you were yesterday. And this mistake that you've done, it's not guaranteed that you will not repeat it. Most likely you will, and not once. But at some point, the neurons in your head, in your brain, they will get in the right order, and then you will not repeat this mistake again. So if you made, some bad plays during the session and you feel beaten, you should tell yourself that tomorrow you will be better than you were yesterday. And this beating, it's inevitable. Like when you do box and whatever, you cannot learn without getting beaten. It's fine. Just deal with it and just enjoy it. Like you got hit, all right, but I got better. Cool, let's move on. Hit me more, I can do more. Let's see how much can I take. So this type of mentality.
Yeah, and I think it's understanding that pain plus reflection equals growth, but you've got to do some reflecting on the pain. And the thing about it is it's so obvious what you need to do, because the pain itself is like something's happened here. I need to think about this, either change my strategy or change how I'm approaching this so it doesn't happen again. And yeah, I really like that kind of remember that life's a game of 1% edges, getting that 1% better, 0.1% better, and it's not a perfect formula. You make the same mistake multiple times before you fix it, but the process of trying to reflect and learn from pain is what leads to that long-term growth. So yeah, I really like that. I think it's a very useful and very practical thing that players can work on. So what would you say to people who, it's actually from the book that we've talked about, Thinking Fast and Slow, which talks about the concept of losing feels twice as bad as winning feels good. So the kind of psychology is that when we lose, like say $1 or $10, it feels twice as bad as winning that same amount. So how would you say we reconcile with that losing generally feels a lot worse than winning feels good in terms of making it a practical learning tool for ourselves?
Well, I think it just takes the cognitive, behavioral psychological practice working by yourself or with the psychologist. I mean, it is a deep work. There is no easy solution. You cannot get some drug that will fix it. You have to go through it. The only one thing I can say that might cheer up many people is my perception of how ideas work. Because playing in some way, in some exact way, equals idea. Like if you want to fold here, you have an idea that people under bluff. And how do ideas emerge in our brains? They emerge by learning, but what is learning? If you make this mistake one time, it doesn't mean that you will never make it again. You probably will make it. Or let's say you made this mistake and your friend tells you, okay, you made this mistake, and you say, yes, I know, I will not make it. But then you make it again. And let's say now you watch some video, or I don't know, read a book on any other topic like business, and you read about the same way of thinking, and you're like, oh yes, I know that mistake, I know that I make it too, but I will not make it in the future. And chances are you will make it in the future. But here's how it works. Each time you get the idea repeated by the different source, it strengthens your neurons, your how to say it in English, it's a bit complicated for me. Like you strengthen the way your neurons are positioned, the chains of your neurons, and you never know how many confirmations of the idea you actually need to make it work on both emotional and logical level. And I like to bring an analogy here with the blockchain or Bitcoin, for example. When you send a Bitcoin to somebody, it needs to get some confirmations until it gets, let's say, 7 confirmations out of 7, the transaction will not be completed. Same thing is the way ideas work. Until you get X number of confirmations, you may be still making these mistakes. But you should know that you will reach this point, and you will stop making this mistake. So do not be desperate if you're making the same dumb mistake 5 times in a row. Keep trying, and sooner or later it will be fixed.
I think the key part there as well is to keep trying, because as you mentioned, like when you're trying to fix a mistake, you taking a new perspectives and different approaches and different information, as long as you're looking for solutions should hopefully at some point get you towards like a resolution. Let's say, for example, someone's overweight and they know they're overweight and they try every different fad of diets, but nothing ever works. There's almost like a defeatist attitude or a defeatist mindset or a belief system that stops them from actually wanting to lose weight or learn about it in a deep way that's going to have a solution. And the same with mistakes. If you're someone who, let's say, I always call down light on rivers, and you just accepted that as part of who you are, no matter how many information you hear from different sides or ways to approach it, if you're not looking to fix it, you're not actually trying to find a resolution, it just kind of goes over your head. So I think it's like the wanting to fix a problem. And yes, you might need like lots of different ideas and ways of learning about something before you fix it. But as long as you're on that path of trying to reflect and learn from mistakes, I 100% agree that like different angles at some point will create enough connections to find that solution, and just being patient with that process is very valuable.
Yes,
All
and
right.
thank you. That was a very important addition, a very important comment, that we must at first recognize the problem and we want to fix it. Because many people, they just say, oh, there is no problem, I'm just unlucky, or any other excuse.
Yeah, and it's also like we can't fix every problem at the same time. So be very concise. I want to fix this problem for this period of time. This is what I'm struggling with. And yeah, being intentional is very, very important with that as well. So for you right now, I'm very curious to know what a day looks like. I know you've got a different day to what you did when you were grinding, but you seem like somebody who goes about your life very intentional. And I'm trying to think like how you optimize your performance and what you do. So maybe we could touch on the most important habits you have on a daily basis. So the things you do that drive either happiness, you feeling good, or your ability to perform either cognitively or physically. Anything that you do on a daily basis that is aligned with that.
Yeah, so 3 things I do on a daily basis. Well, even 4, I'd say. One is gratitude. If I forget to do it in the morning, I try to do it before going to sleep. Second is I'm trying to have any type of sport at least 6 days a week, and the harder the better. And the third thing is the understanding of the detrimental side of the comfort, if I can call it like that. Which means that every day I try to do something uncomfortable. Right now, it's the cold shower that I do, like very, very cold shower before going to sleep. And if I see any other things that I can do, I try to do them as well. Like, for example, a couple days ago, I read about this idea, like our ancestors used to train. They used to put backpacks that weigh like 20 kilos and then walk with them. And then there is the scientific research that says that the chance of trauma is very low when you do that compared to running. So I decided to try that, and I went for like 3 hour bike and walk with like 8 kilograms weight, and it was hard, but like the harder the better, it makes you stronger. So these 3 things that I try to do every
Love it.
day.
Yeah, very, very nice habits there. And yeah, I think it's understanding for each of us. We probably have 3 to 5 daily habits we can do on a regular basis that will allow us to feel good and perform good. And you've got to find those ones for you and do them regularly. And it should be like part of your routine, the same way of brushing your teeth is part of your routine. Yeah, for me, it's meditation, it's time outdoors, it's daily exercise. Yeah, there's the main ones, to be honest, in terms of things I do every day to make myself feel good. So yeah, I think it's really good to find that rhythm for you, which you've obviously found for yourself. Rene, for you, I know you're new to fatherhood and things are very disrupted, so I'm probably going to throw you on the spot in terms of what you're currently doing, but how is your current rhythm of your days and things that you do on a regular basis to allow yourself to feel good?
It was funny that you pointed it out, because in my head it's like, yeah, changing diapers. As like as like a little bit of sarcasm in there. Yeah, my routines and stuff have been a little bit all over the place. I think I've experimented with almost anything. I guess the main one that still stands is cold showers. But to be fair, no, I'm gonna scrap that one. It's not really a habit because I live in Rio de Janeiro at the moment. It's just fucking hot outdoor all the time. So a cold shower, I think cold showers only count if you live in a cold country. That's, for example, when I was living in the Netherlands, I would take cold showers, or when I was living in Malta and it was cold outside, that's when cold showers count. Here, it's like, first of all, the water isn't that cold that comes out of a shower anyway in a very warm country. I had this problem actually in Malta all the time as well. In Malta in the summer, you just cannot refresh yourself. No, there's no cold water. It doesn't exist. So here is the same. Like the water is cold, but it's not that cold. Meditation on and off. Yeah, I would say the only things that usually only really stick with me, even in the hardest times, which I guess, fatherhood of a 2-month-old, I guess we could describe as like disruptive times, right? Where a lot of things are no longer in your control. You have your kid to take in consideration, your wife and stuff like that. Other things in life uh, that keeps interrupting with your schedule. Think exercise to a certain degree. Now, obviously, I'm not. It's more maintenance than anything else. Eating healthy always sticks. Sleep, to be honest, I do try to still prioritize, even though, as you might imagine, a baby crying a little bit in the middle of the night is a little bit disruptive. But I do try to still prioritize that. So I would say sleep, diet, exercise. These three pillars. It's usually the main thing that I need to have in place, regardless of the situation. Um, and then if everything is in place, and I do, for example, feel more of a need to perform, like there's things I have to show up for example, take this podcast, then I make sure that I sleep better. I make sure that I'm more disciplined, make sure I go to bed earlier, or I make sure I did try at least, I do try at least get the cold shower. Or actually, another routine that I like is every morning go for a walk outside. I think that one is really, really helpful as well. So first thing in the morning, I get my dog and we go out, get some sunshine. I think this really works. So, for example, this spot was a little bit on the earlier side for me, but then I prefer to go to bed earlier, wake up earlier, and go for a walk with my dog instead of skipping it. I think these are the main things that I stood out. Other than that, like I said, I think I've experimented with most things, gratitude, meditation, all through phases in my life, I would say. Um wrapping this podcast off, Sergi, going forward, what are some of your goals in life? What are you most passionate about and want to focus more time on?
Well, just like you, I'm expecting to become a young father soon, maybe next month even,
All right,
or
congrats.
this month if things go, yeah, unexpectedly well, if I can say so. So yeah, life is going to change. Well, I have in my plans to read a couple of books about how to raise children. Wanna be good in that, and then just concentrate on coaching in poker, and then YouTube channel, try to put up at least one video per 2 weeks, and then doing sports, trying to keep up with the new, how to say, obstacles, with the new changes in my life. Try to not to skip sport and have time for myself and my wife, living quality life.
Yeah, it really a kid really helps you realign your priorities. For example, something that I cut out, which I noticed I was spending just way too much time on, which actually I'm not really sure where it has a place, but I really love football. I follow a lot of football, but I was just following so much football news and YouTube and stuff like that. This is probably the first thing that I cut out. I have less time, also like just mentally in your brain, less input. So you start to prioritize things in your life, and it's really, yeah, you start to reinvent your schedule. But yeah, the weird thing is like everything is around. So when you're a performer, especially in poker, everything is around you, right? It's me, me, me. You always, and now suddenly you have something else that's more important. So that's the biggest shift. Also, like in terms of identity rise, right? You identify yourself with a high performer, a productive guy, and now you suddenly make the shift in identity. Now you have to become a present, loving father, for example. Actually, a book recommendation for you: The Daily Dad. I don't know. Do you know any of the books of Ryan Holiday? Obstacle is the way, ego is the enemy, silence is the key. And I think I missed
Yeah.
one. Daily Stoic. He also has. Do you know this guy?
Yeah, I've read Ego is the Enemy. Yeah, I know him. I've listened to some of his podcasts too.
Yeah, actually, he has a Daily Dad newsletter that you can sign up to. But the
Mhm.
book, The Daily Dad, is pretty good. It's just like the Daily Stoic. Every day there's just one page, gives you like some Stoic information. Every month is a different topic. I remember December, that was the first month that it was very dark. It was all about basically every day there was a story about like someone would die. There was every day was a story, and it basically, it meant like, listen, appreciate this moment. Hold your child in your hand because tomorrow it could be over. That was kind of always the moral of the story. But then every month in January, I think the topic was, well, how you want your kid to be. You should show up as an example. So a classic, people will say, no, I don't want my child to to spend all day on cell phones, and you spend all day on your cell phone. So like basically they're just going to become a copy of you. In my case, she literally was a copy of me, because if you would put pictures next to each other, it's identical. But in terms of behavior, yeah, you know, you have to show the good example. So those would be like some tips for me to you. Closing off, what would you like the main takeaway to be the audience gets from the conversation we had today?
Get acquainted with the discomfort and pain and always learn from it. Do not view it as something bad. Mistakes, rejections, failures equals experience, and not something detrimental to your success.
Anything you would like to add to that, Adam, or any things that you would like to add before we close it off?
No, that was a perfect summary and points for the audience to work on. So thank you very much for your time, Sergii. We really appreciate it. We went deep on lots of topic and you shared a lot of wisdom. So we thank you for your time.
Thanks for watching, guys. I've had a lot of joy with you. Thank you.
Great conversation that was with Sergii, aka Jayser. A lot of knowledge dropped again as usual. Adam, anything that sticked out to you as a main takeaway?
Well, we went deep into a lot of mindset issues and his journey into developing a strong mindset. Very interesting that he talked about himself struggling with psychology and mindset for 6 to 8 years, I think was the time frame he was having problems. So yeah, the tools he developed, I think, were really practical. And I think one of them was the mental game hand history sort of thing, where he was basically noting all his kind of triggers, stimulus, and how they were affecting him in game. He had a nice system for basically reframing and rewiring the meaning he was given events. You can go back through and watch that bit. Another part he was talking about was biases. Again, I won't go into all of them because he went quite deep onto all different biases, but understanding how your brain works and the things that impact your decision making, whether they come from the ego or whether they come from blind spots, I think super important as a poker player, as we think we're very logical people who make very strategic decisions, but in reality, we've got a lot of biases, emotions, and things that impact our decision making. So bringing them to the forefront is really important so you can make good decisions. Another thing that I thought was interesting was his gratitude practice and this happiness scoring that he had. I think that's very super interesting in terms of how he scores his happiness every single day, and he writes down things that correlated with the high score, things that correlate with the low score. And yeah, I think this is a really good thing that I probably will start with myself, because it's one of those things where you mentioned as well, if you focus on something, you almost like feel good about it, or you bring more intentionality. And gratitude in particular is one of those things that we often neglect the good things that are already happening in our lives in pursuit of the thing that's going to happen next. So we put ourselves in the future state. When I achieve this, I will feel happy. In reality, there's lots of things happening right now which you feel happy, content with, which I think's a really good balancer for a lot of us ambitious, striving, going for that next goal kind of people, myself included. So I think it's really good to remind ourselves of what makes us happy now and to install a bit of a gratitude practice. And the final thing was kind of towards the end of the conversation, he talked about learning how to lose as a poker skill that he's learned, and also taking pleasure from pain. I think that's a very practical thing to work towards, of how can we learn to see the utility in pain? Because as a poker player, a lot of it is suffering. You're going to lose a lot. You're going to have bad sessions. You're going to make mistakes. There is an inbuilt pain in the process of trying to get better at the game, and to take pleasure in that pursuit by knowing I'm going to learn from it, knowing I'm going to get better, just makes that whole journey one more practical in terms of what you're learning from it, but also allows you to enjoy the process of being a poker player rather than wishing that you could retire with a pot of money at the end of it. So yeah, those are my main takeaways. Anything that you wrote down today, Rene?
Yeah, I wanted to add to that for people who want to get more out of enjoyment out of it. I think I touched on Ryan Holiday's book, Obstacles the Way. Remember, I read that and then I was like, actually, nothing bad can happen to me anymore, because, you know, it's kind of like you either win or learn type of mentality. It's like, oh, cool, another obstacle. Cool, I can develop in this way. Like your mind completely changed. So I would, if you struggle a lot with like, oh, why do I keep on facing these obstacles, blah, blah, blah. Obstacles the Way, Ryan Holiday, definitely a good read. So, quick tip as well for gratitude. I think nowadays with apps and stuff, you probably have good things as well. But I used to have the 5-minute journal. I don't know if you know about it, Adam. But basically, the 5-minute journal, I like to have actually something physical. You can put, for example, next to the place where you eat breakfast. And there it also wrote down like, oh, what are a couple of things that you're grateful for? Very, very, very easy. And it should be easy, because else it's hard to implement. I've experimented with this and made like books of like 10 questions or something that I ask myself every morning. You do it for 2 weeks and then you stop. That's been, in all honesty, that's been usually my experience how these things go. And also, I think if for the people who are like, yeah, gratitude, think most people rationally agree with, it's probably a good idea. The thing when you write down gratitude, it's not like, oh yeah, I'm definitely grateful for that. It's very important to also feel it, because feeling grateful is a skill that you can train. So how does feeling grateful actually feel? And I'm sure some listeners, and to a certain degree, myself included, it's very hard to feel gratitude. It's actually an emotion that you have to train. So when you write down, really try to provoke emotions of gratitude. Okay. So often it's very easy. Yeah, you should feel this way, you should feel that way. But if you don't experience, if it's not within your default state, it's actually emotions that you have to train, which is actually trainable. So interesting point for the listeners. In terms of technical, we talked a lot about effective study habits. He talked about that this was one of the most important things that he likes to teach your students. He touched on a couple of points. One of them, we talked about spot frequency, something that we talked on before as well. He also pointed out study spots where people are more likely to screw up. And then I asked him for the characteristics and said, yeah, there's usually more unfrequent situations, or situations where the way humans construct their range naturally leads to mistakes on a later street. So these were like some two pieces of advice that I wrote down. We also talked about how theory is a good foundation, but you should study theory from a perspective of trying to understand it. And then, now I understand it. How are people likely to screw up, and how can I take advantage of that? Like, he was clearly, yes, he was very studied theoretically, because as we agreed, right, he talked about building a house. Yeah, you need the foundation. But after that, you can spend more time on other things and trying to exploit people. And that's in the end where most of the money is being made. Great conversation. I want to thank Sergii again for coming on and sharing his wisdom. I want to thank you, Adam, for co-hosting this podcast with me today. I want to thank everyone for listening, especially if you made it all the way through the end. Give this video a subscribe, thumbs up, notifications on, all that good stuff. Leave your main takeaways down in the comments below. GTO Wizard, our sponsor, will pick one of the main takeaways and they will win 1 month of free GTO Wizard. So definitely go share with us what your main takeaways are. And I think that's it. See you guys in the next episode.